Yo guys, good evening. I am back with another video for the series about me just answering generalized questions that people have asked me over YouTube. And so now that I actually have some time, I'm just kind of getting ready to go through the entire series, more or less. I'm just going to power through it while I have some time to myself. And so tonight we're going to be covering the topics of Twitter, TikTok, Twitch and cons, as well as freedom of speech. The first question that I typically get is, what happened to Twitter? Why don't we get clips on Twitter anymore? And the answer is very simple. So I had been on Twitter for a while. I still have the account there and stuff, but I don't really use it for anything outside of going and transferring clips from my Nintendo Switch to YouTube, strangely enough. And so I had used it for a while to talk with friends that I had, mutuals that I had. I used it a lot to keep up with the news and people on Twitch and just everything. It was my information hub for a very long time. I wouldn't really do too much with it. I would just kind of get on, check stuff, maybe answer a couple of messages, and then, I would go ahead and log off. I had decided that I did not want to use Twitter anymore because after the acquisition of Twitter by Elon Musk, I kind of said to myself, yeah, this platform's going to go to hell really fast. At the time, a lot of people were like, no, it's not going to be like that. And I just, like, when you notice that a billionaire apartheid piss baby is getting ready to buy something, you can pretty much guarantee that it's going to go to hell very quickly. So people had tried to dissuade me from it. I was thinking about shutting down the account for a very long time, but people would commonly say, oh, hey, it's not going to be like that, it's not going to be like that, it's just going to be a transfer of ownership, nothing bad's going to happen. And I pretty much knew that it was over day one when he said that he was going to make the platform even for everybody and that, freedom of speech was going to reign supreme. And at the time it predicted that, Elon Musk was going to let hate speech run all over the place, and, people had tried to tell me, no, it's not going to be like that, he's a good guy. And for as long as I've been keeping up with the Musks in general, they've never really been terribly good people. And so whenever I have a tendency to notice when people like this buy a platform, I can pretty much guarantee it that it's going to go to hell. So it was kind of weird. I had noticed that the changes in Twitter were very, very quick. It was not a slow process. It was not like a progressive change that happens over like a number of years or like even like a year and a half or even a year. I noticed like it was a process that had happened over the course of a few short months. I noticed that there was a bunch of accounts that were reinstated that really had no right to be reinstated because a lot of them were harbingers of hate speech. I noticed that politics went absolutely insane on Twitter. I had noticed all these things happening in a very rapid fashion. Homophobia went up, hate speech went up, transphobia went up. Various features that I had used, like the Twitter API and stuff for various functions, was locked behind a paywall. Various other functions were gutted. People were fired. I mean, it was just like a hell of a thing. And, as I had kind of just looked at the transformation of it, I had noticed things were getting really bad really fast. It used to be that like I had my feed heavily customized to not feature certain things, and I found as Twitter was under new management and as various changes were made that I was seeing tweets that I really just did not want to go and see. A lot of them were either homophobic or transphobic, and you would go and you would report the tweet and stuff, and a lot of the time, nothing would really be done with it. I didn't really care for it too much, I can understand freedom of speech to a certain extent, but I've never really considered hate speech freedom of speech, and we'll be getting into that a little bit later. I had started spinning down my Twitter because it had become such a hate-filled platform that I really just had no desire to be on it. But I was left with a dilemma because at the same time I was like, okay, I have a bunch of people here, that I'm going to try to keep porting this content to, because traditionally my clips would go from the Switch to Twitter. They would get posted there first for people to view and enjoy. And then from there, they would go from Twitter back down to my PC and then up to YouTube for y'all here to actually go and be able to watch and such. So I said to myself, okay, well, we know that Twitter is a cesspool. We know that it's not getting any better. We know that it's bad for people's mental health. I had stared at Twitter very long and very hard, and, I had noticed that there was a couple of changes, like, the rise in hate speech, and then promoting tweets into your personal feed that, were just loaded with raw vitriol and stuff. And so it used to be that I had everything heavily customized via custom commands and stuff, and things to ignore, and all of that more or less went out the window. So I really had no control over what I would see on Twitter and stuff. Even in my notifications and stuff, it would give me notifications for tweets that I just had no interest in. They'd be like, oh, well, so-and-so posted this, and normally it would be really, really fucking awful. I've never really appreciated Elon Musk's narcissism. I think him trying to turn the platform into his personal playground was just really awful. He just always really pegged me as kind of a spoiled piss baby in many ways, and I just had never really appreciated it. I didn't really like a lot of the changes that were made. It inherently made the platform worse. I could tell that a lot of these changes weren't really well thought through, like starting with how the membership option, I can't remember the name of it, but the membership option was like guaranteed verification, more or less, at that point. I always thought that was kind of sleazy. Like, I thought that being verified on Twitter in general was incredibly foolish and stuff. I mean, it was like a blue check mark next to you, and it didn't really do much, but locking it behind a paywall was incredibly strange. And so I could tell that, he just wanted to have Twitter be a shit show, and it wasn't really that hard to see. It was reflected in politics, it was reflected in various accounts that were unbanned, it was reflected in accounts that were banned, it was reflected in how hate speech was handled. Like, it was just reflected in all this stuff. And after a while, I felt that I could not in good conscience direct people over to my Twitter knowing that the platform is morally bankrupt, more or less. I didn't really like that too much. I didn't like the concept of it. I still don't like the concept of it. There was a point in time where I was actually a relatively happy Twitter user, and I would be like, okay, go ahead and check my Twitter out. But as things kind of degraded and stuff, I felt that, I wanted to leave the platform, but given what I used the platform for, I didn't really think that I was ever going to be able to. Like, I liked the idea of it, but with the way that Nintendo actually handles clips and, like, getting them off of the Switch, I had to keep Twitter just for the sake of being a tool to move clips around, more or less. So I had made the choice to start spinning everything down. And it had been something that I had thought about for like a very long time. And I said, you know what, now's the time. I had gone through a very lengthy process of it. I had manually gone through and gotten rid of damn near all of my followers. The only followers that I kept were the ones that had been with me for like so long, like close friends, amazing people, things like that. But as far as everybody else, it's kind of like, we're going to be turning this into a tool. We're not going to be posting here anymore. There really is no real reason for me to go and, have these people here, because everything's going to be being migrated over to YouTube. So I had started spinning everything down. I had gotten rid of the excess of followers, and then I had tried to mass delete all my tweets. That way it's just a straight slate with a single tweet explaining what this particular Twitter is for. But with the API being locked behind a paywall, most of the services that you can actually go and use to auto-delete your tweets are no longer available. They're no longer functional. So what this equated to was, after the followers were out the door, I had started manually deleting all of my tweets. They weren't bad tweets. Well, many of them weren't bad tweets. Some of them were rants and stuff. I wasn't at my best on Twitter, I don't think. And so I had started the process of manually deleting everything, and it had taken upwards of I think it was like a week and 2 days to go through and delete a couple thousand tweets. I would sit in my feed, and my replies, and just click, tweet, delete, click, tweet, delete. I would literally sit back and listen to TV while kind of automatically doing this in the background. I went through, I got rid of all of my likes and stuff. I had unfollowed a whole mess of people that were either homophobic or transphobic, and I don't really check my feed anymore because there's just nothing good out of it. Like, Twitter is pretty much raw vitriol all the time, and I just don't really care for it. And so I had completely cleaned out all of my Twitter and stuff, and another reason I had stopped using Twitter was I honestly believed it brought out the worst in me. What would happen is I would go to Twitter and I would be incredibly heated about something and I would rant about it. And it used to be that I would rant over the course of like 5 or 6 tweets, you know, just daisy chaining replies more or less. But when they introduced the mass tweet chain function, I had started abusing the holy living hell out of it. I went from like leaving small rants to like full-blown speeches of just like thoughts and ideal, because I have a tendency to think in long form. You know, I think deeply about a lot of things, and so my Twitter was kind of like my outlet for that, more or less, and it was getting to the point where I was saying things on Twitter that I should probably be saying and tackling in therapy. So in order for my therapeutic life to continue, I had to discontinue Twitter because these were all things that I should have been telling my therapist instead of just dumping it out on the internet and stuff. And so I just kind of made the choice. I said, yeah, you know, I'm not really doing too great on Twitter. I'm triggered a fair bit. You know, I'm kind of becoming a little bit of an extremist with some things, you know, especially when it came to politics and stuff and everything else. You know, with me being kind of like a hardcore leftist and stuff, I kind of realized how bad I was getting with when Roe v. Wade was overturned. You know, I had made a large tweet chain about it and stuff, and I was just extremely fucking pissed with every fiber of my being, and so I felt like at that point that I was spending too much time on the internet. I was sitting back and I was looking at it and said, you know, I said to myself, I was like, with all the time I spend bitching, I could be doing something productive. And it was food for thought, I think, for like a very long time, and so I had slowly but surely offloaded from Twitter. I kept the name, I completely gutted the account, I still use it to transfer clips, but the only actual tweet that is on there is literally just a tombstone of sorts saying, hey, I used to enjoy Twitter, this is what it is now. It's quite literally nothing more than a tool for me to move my clips around with. You can find me at all these other platforms, and then there's a video attached below it. And so I felt that when I got off of Twitter, life was a little bit more boring, but I think I was happier with it, like I still am, you know, like I'm not like chronically stressed out all the time, and I don't really have to worry about logging into a platform and reading hateful shit on a fairly regular basis and stuff, and I think it's overall been a lot better for my mental health. I feel like I'm performing better in therapy, I'm tackling things a lot better in therapy overall, you know, like it was just a direct upgrade to my life, I think. I'm not like sitting there doom scrolling, like laying in bed with my phone in my hand, just doom scrolling, reading all this awful shit 24/7. You know, there was just a lot to it, and, you know, when I weeded Twitter out, things had gotten better. I kind of just stopped paying attention to the platform as a whole. I recognized it much like I recognized Tumblr and Reddit as veritable shitholes. I didn't really feel like Twitter was a place where I could have any sort of intelligent discourse. Most of the time, if you went to like comments or something, it was people just pissing left and pissing right and just insulting people for the hell of it. Like, Twitter was not a place I don't really think that any sort of intelligent discourse could really happen. And I think when I had that realization, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty much done, because I like to have long, drawn-out conversations, and, you know, most of those that are close to me are fully aware of this. I will have all sorts of conversations about all sorts of topics from like A to Z, more or less, you know, politics, religion, all that jazz, and I just, past a certain point, I feel like I couldn't really go and do that on Twitter because the user base in general is incredibly cancerous. And so I had started offloading everything to other websites. At the time, a fella that I have met in passing named Clover, I had requested an invite to Blue Sky from him. I was like, hey hon, I would like to get away from the fucking shit show. May I have an invite for Blue Sky? I would love to join you on there. And so he was like, hey, not a problem, here's your invite. I went, made an account, and I had joined him on the platform where news for the YouTube channel is posted there. All of my photos are posted there. Pretty much everything. Like, I don't rant on Blue Sky because the environment seems healthier. Like, it doesn't really bring out the worst in me. It's always funny to see people doing silly shit and making fun of Twitter on it. So, the problem that I have with Blue Sky, though, is it is not open to the public. And why this is an issue is because when you have a closed ecosystem like that with a small user base, there really isn't any sort of point to going and moving your socials over there when the demographic is really small. And then people can't just publicly view the feed. They have to have a login as well. It's a lot like Facebook in that regard. So while I do enjoy Blue Sky, I felt like I had misstepped very grievously by going and just moving everything over there. I mean, I still have Twitter, of course, but I don't really feel like giving a platform my time, my energy, or my effort, or any of my content when I know that it's just kind of hate-filled. So overall, I had left Twitter because I felt that it would be better for me and better for others. I know that if it's not very healthy for me, it can't really be healthy for others, so it really made no sense, I think, in the long run to sit there and say, okay, we're going to have all of our news here, so I said to myself, okay, to risk, to get rid of the risk of exposure, more or less, to hateful things, we're going to go ahead and just move over to Blue Sky, and then, of course, have everything migrated over to YouTube's community feed, which is where all the news is dumped. Personal thoughts sometimes, photos, just all kinds of stuff. I've made really heavy use out of the community feed, and while it can't do everything that I want it to do, it's a very solid start. Like, for example, in the community feed, I can't go and post panoramic photos, because my photos have to be within a certain size. Okay, that's fine. I can't post videos either, but then again, it would make no sense to do a video in the feed when I could just go and post it to YouTube directly. So while it can't really do everything that I absolutely want it to do, I feel like it's a very solid place to go and start a good foundation in terms of like delivering news and stuff. So I update the community feed pretty damn regularly. I'm actually pretty proud of what I've accomplished with it. So moving on to the next question, it is why don't you post to TikTok anymore? The same reason why I don't post to Twitter. So I had started using TikTok because an ex-boyfriend had actually recommended it to me. He was on there, all of his friends were on there, and like, it's super fun, and it was like right when TikTok was just coming out, more or less, and so it was like literally a bunch of people doing silly, goofy dances and comedy bits to like little snippets of music and stuff. And when I had gotten on TikTok, I was actually having a lot of fun with it. I had picked out all the things that I like comedy, things like that, and so that's typically what my For You was populated with. Past a certain point, I had tried to integrate it into the ecosystem that I was like trying to build with Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, like basically all of my socials, to have like that branding ecosystem that I wanted to go and build. That way people had access to whatever content I was producing at the time with ease, more or less. So TikTok was a lot like Twitter in some regards, except I find that TikTok is more of a flat-out rage machine. As time went on, things just kind of stopped being funny. TikTok became more of a news media source, I think, except with Twitter, I would go and manually look for the news on it. And then with TikTok, it would just be kind of casually thrown up in my For You. It would be like videos about war and like the loss of rights in America and just everything else. And while it's good to have a certain level of awareness of these things, I find that constantly bathing in it is incredibly unhealthy. And so past a certain point, there was like no comedy, there was nothing. It was literally just kids whining about anything and everything, adults getting involved in drama that didn't really make much sense on what is supposed to various pissing matches between all sorts of people, you know, like it became nothing but an outlet for pretty much everybody's rage, and I had just kind of gotten sick and tired of being sick and tired after a while. Needless to say, my TikTok was actually, the first one that I had was actually relatively successful. It did better than, strangely enough, my YouTube. I would go and port my short form clips to it, and from there what would happen, essentially, is I had gained around 16k in following, which, you know, it's not bad. It's not bad, it's not great, you know, it's right where, you know, it should be. It's right where I wanted to be at the time. I just enjoyed making content and talking to people and stuff. I had no real sort of issue with it. But as time went on, I got tired of bathing in the rage. A lot of people would try to get me involved with drama, and then what had ultimately killed TikTok for me was it was two things really. It was the overwhelming negativity paired up with misinformation and a piss-poor way of moderating content. So the content moderation policies for TikTok are fucking awful, more or less. Like, all of them are incredibly defunct. They're very easy to go and manipulate, and it wasn't really that great. So I would have people that would go and routinely report my content because they were pissed with me. This would end up with me having various suspensions. And so this process would go on for like a very long time. I thought it was incredibly weird because people would be like, well, I didn't like this game, or I didn't like this gameplay, so instead of just saying, hey, I didn't really care for this, or better yet, not saying anything and just, you know, swiping up, more or less, they would go leave a negative impact on my content, and then they would go and mass report it if they didn't really agree with it. The moderation is incredibly easy to manipulate on TikTok. It's not hard to get somebody banned if you just have like enough people going and reporting their shit, especially if you're a larger content creator. So my first account was banned, and then my second account, it had gotten up to 5k, it was banned. And then I thought it was kind of weird because a lot of the offenses would be really, really strange. Like, I would get weird notifications. One of them was for a clip of Doom 3 where I was going and shooting an imp, and I had managed to nail him mid-air, you know, with a shotgun, and just dropped him right then and there, and it was later reported as endangering a minor, more or less, and it was just very, very strange. You know, the moderation policies for TikTok are very, very vague, and they're not adhered to very well. They're very easy to manipulate and stuff, and I think it just kind of creates a cancerous platform. So after a while, I had just kind of stopped. The only reason I really have it these days is because my sister and my girlfriend actually enjoy sending me funny things on it, but I don't really participate in it that much anymore because it's just kind of a waste. I found that misinformation on TikTok was also a very large problem. Yeah, like a hell of a large problem. Like, there would be so many different spins on various things going on that it would be really fucking unreal and incredibly hard to keep up with. They have a function for reporting misinformation and stuff, but they don't really ever do anything on it. You know, so it really makes no point to even have it there if it's never going to be acted on or anything like that. So TikTok also has a really bad white supremacy problem. As somebody that is, you know, pagan and Jewish, I don't really care for white supremacy that much. I feel the world just does not have any sort of room for it whatsoever. So I thought it was incredibly weird because what would happen is we would have white supremacists going around doing incredibly sketchy shit, making incredibly sketchy videos, and their content would be allowed to stay up. But if I had placed a comment commenting about how, you know, they're wrong or how this is not okay, I would frequently have that comment removed, and then I would subsequently get a suspension on top of it. And I would also have to deal with this with hate speech that Christians would frequently leave in their videos and stuff, and if I had called it out, you know, I could expect to get a suspension, you know, and then just expect to live with it, essentially. I feel that TikTok's not a very productive platform. It's mainly a bunch of people whining and bitching, but not really doing much of anything. And so I feel there's a lot of attention grabbing as well. There was a lot of things that really kind of grabbed me on TikTok, like a lot of primary content that I would see thumbing through is a lot of people going, "Help, I'm about to be homeless. If you go and, donate to the link below, I can go and do X, Y, and Z." I would see this a lot. They would frequently state that, "Oh, I only have like a week left," but they would be there like a month later, doing the same shit, essentially. And it was just like really, really obnoxious. And I never really cared for it too much. Another thing that I had noticed very quickly is how mental illness is portrayed on TikTok. There's really two facets of it. The first facet was people being bullied to the point of suicide, which has happened quite often. The most recent example is Inquisitor 3, who was a Call of Duty / Star Wars cosplayer. Was bullied into taking his own life, nothing ever happened. And then the other aspect of the mental health side of things is I would notice there'd be a lot of kids that would get on and they would be like, "I have, X, Y, and Z, mental health disorder," and they would kind of wear it like a badge of pride. And so this would start like a lot of unhealthy discord, I feel, because it would be very evident a lot of the time that they were like full of shit and stuff and just kind of clamoring for attention as children have a tendency to do. And this would have the effect of directly pissing off those that actually have these disorders, which is very reasonable, I feel. So I would see this a lot on TikTok, especially with BPD as well as DID and Tourette's. The Tourette's community suffered immensely on TikTok. Tourette's is not as common as people thought it was, but it seemed like every time I was scrolling through a video, everybody was claiming that they had it, or they would be making fun of it, and then they would later be outed for lying about it. It was just kind of this ongoing issue. With BPD, it was almost the exact same thing, DID as well. With BPD, the content I found was a little bit more depressing, or it was directly hype content where it's like, "I have BPD and we're known for fucking people up and all this other stuff." It would, these streams of content would do nothing more than breed an extreme misconception about what people who have these disorders are like. And then a lot of the times they would try to go and glamorize it and everything else, and it was just very, very obnoxious, I feel, and I didn't really care for it. As somebody that has BPD and a recent diagnosis of DID, I can tell you that it's no joke, literally. So I just kind of hated how what would happen is like kids would kind of latch onto it, and then it would start off with one, and then very quickly, others would join in on it, and it just wasn't really that great, like it gave these communities a large amount of problems, and then it did nothing really productive with it. The only thing it really accomplished in doing was breeding more stigma towards it, because people would see this content like, "Hey, these aren't really people that I want to be around," more or less, and so it would kind of create problems for the rest of us, which really wasn't, that great. And so I really just kind of hated it, because past a certain point on TikTok, it seems like mental illness became more of a trend. It's just like this trendy thing that everybody was kind of going and clamoring onto, and it just, well, to be honest with you, it just fucking sucked. So I had gotten tired of like seeing it past a certain point, like I'm a very strong believer that if you're going to end the stigma against something, it starts with breeding a certain level of understanding, and a certain level of understanding can only really be achieved when you're being honest about things. So if there's no honesty, you can't really go and breed any sort of understanding, because you can't educate correctly on it. And so I just felt that the entire situation was obnoxious. The Tourette's community got hit pretty hard, the BPD community got vilified, as we typically have a tendency to do. And the DID community, now everybody thinks that everybody else is just faking DID, so those that actually have DID and suffer immensely from it and everything else, now when we come forward and talk about it, everybody's kind of like, "Oh, it's DID," it just kind of, I feel in many ways the TikTok had completely destroyed, these demographics and stuff, and it was a lot more suffering than what was really needed in everyday life, more or less, and I didn't really care for it that much. And I would see kids go and host like pissing contests for who had like the most disorders and stuff. That was extremely counterproductive. I didn't really care for it that much. You know, like, I'm all for people like talking and having open discourse about things, but there's a difference between wanting to have open discourse that's productive versus having open discourse that's just there for self-gratification. And so I had the realization about it. I looked at TikTok as a whole and I said, yeah, this platform's garbage. It's just straight acid. Most of the time it's doing more harm than actual good. And so past a certain point I said, yeah, I just really don't want to be involved with this. And it was incredibly fair, I feel. You know, so I don't post to it anymore. I don't port my clips over there because 9 times out of 10, you know, it's going to get reported. And then when it is reported, if you ask for the content to be restored, 9 times out of 10, you never hear back about it. I mean, it's literally a platform that, while it's doing a good job sticking around now, and while it's a massive platform that everybody's on, I feel strongly that it's going to be a flash in the pan. You know, like, it's big now, but it's not going to last. Places that are rage outlets like that typically die off, as we typically see with, like, Facebook and, you know, all those other major platforms that are currently going through their extended cycles of decay, more or less. So that's why we don't post to TikTok anymore. You know, there's really no point to it, there's no desire for it. I mean, it was nice to have the followers that I had and stuff, and it was nice to see growth and everything else, but the thing is I want to be chastised when I'm actually doing something wrong. You know, for people to go and just mass report somebody just because they don't like certain aspects of them or they don't like a certain piece of content, and getting them banned as an end result just really isn't how you go about doing it, you know. So I never really just cared for that, and I never really cared for that too much at all, really. Regarding Twitch, it was actually one of my favorite platforms for a very long time. I have been a member on it for a very long time. I remember Twitch back when it was known as Justin.tv and it was a part of CNET. And so back in the day, it was kind of like the Wild West. Twitch would actually shut the servers off past a certain point. Content wasn't heavily moderated. There wasn't bot functionality yet. People would get on and stream their gameplay in a whopping 480p resolution, and then other streams would stream things like television shows and movies, and it was actually really nice. It was kind of like going over to a friend's house to a certain extent, and then just hanging out on their lawn and just doing fun shit all night. And so, but I find, like with every other major platform, when ownership changes, things have a tendency to go to hell. So I had watched Twitch for a while. I would watch like a lot of boomer shooter gameplay and stuff, and I was a staple in a lot of communities. You know, I was a lot younger back then, and you know, I enjoyed just the interactability of everything. You know, I enjoyed talking to other people from across the world, and it was just a very fun thing to do, more or less. You know, it's in many ways Twitch is how I globalized. You know, and became aware of other cultures and stuff and bred an understanding of them and how awesome a lot of these other cultures can be. I started not really caring for Twitch around, I want to say, 2018. It was very evident that shit was going south with Twitch. Moderation was really bad, filing complaints was really bad. The cons in general were actually quite bad. I had noticed that as time had gone on, Twitch as a platform was just degrading heavily, and it was largely being driven by the users on it, not generally the platform itself. The platform still had pretty decent policies and stuff in place. They could have been better, but they weren't horrible by any means. What had really killed it for me, I think, was that there was always this rush to be a partner on Twitch. Back when I was streaming, I didn't give a shit. I would just go and hang out with people. Sometimes I would stream solo, sometimes I would stream with friends. I didn't really have any sort of delusion about going and saying, hey, I'm going to go and build this huge following, and then we're going to go and, we're going to be rich because I'm going to become partner and like all this other stuff. It was very strange. So I found that there was, as Twitch had gotten bigger, especially after the Amazon acquisition, as soon as Twitch had started to blow up back when League of Legends was immensely more popular than what it is now, and CSGO was still a mainstay, I found that people had kind of started losing their minds for, I don't know how the hell to explain it, people were just kind of losing their minds for a really long time, a lot of people didn't want to go out and get standard jobs. They firmly believed that if they had streamed for 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, that eventually they'll make partner and have a huge ass following and everything else. And then the way that I had looked at it is I had paid attention to a lot of those that had made it big, and I was like, yeah, a lot of this is a lack of competition and dumb luck. And so a lot of people are like, well, no, you got to be positive, and it's not so much a point of being positive, it's a point of being a realist. A lot of these people, if you ask them, a lot of these large casters, if you ask them, would they go and try to be who they are today, starting fresh on the platform? If you ask them, would I be able to make it again? A lot of them will simply say no, because the platform's too big, there's too much competition. You're literally a drop in the ocean with as big of a clientele base as Twitch has. So a lot of people would carry this delusion, I think, where they would be like, oh, I'm gonna make it big and do X, Y, and Z and all this other stuff, and I just never really cared for it. Twitch for me, I think, was always a place where I could go and stream my gameplay, hang out, and have fun with it. What had really killed Twitch for me, where Twitch really had started to decline, was a lack of quality control in almost every facet from, I want to say, late 2018 forward. So, I used to go to TwitchCon. I used to go to a lot of cons, actually. And so, what had happened past a certain point was, a lot of these cons, a lot of these larger casters would go and sleep with fans, and I never really cared for that, and so I always felt like it was very, very sketchy and stuff. And then if a complaint was ever made against them, it would never really be handled correctly, most notably with Dr. Disrespect and everything else. A lot of those larger casters would literally just kind of sit there and do incredibly shady shit all the time, and nothing would ever really come of it, so what wound up happening with TwitchCon is I stopped going as a caster and I started going as a bodyguard. I would have friends that would attend TwitchCon and they'd be like, hey, if I paid for your ticket, would you mind going to me with TwitchCon, because I need somebody big to follow me around. I'm a cosplayer and I'm female, and I don't really feel like I can go and trust anybody at these particular cons while I'm going in trying to do some networking. And after a while, I would just kind of say yes. I would be like, oh, hey, we can actually go and do this. I don't mind. I'll go ahead and follow you around, kind of abuse the scary dog privilege a little bit. You can do your networking. It'll be okay. There was a bunch of people that reported sexual assault at TwitchCon. I feel that the company kind of has a direct responsibility, while the company and the venue holder in general has a tendency to, well, they should, technically speaking, have a certain level of responsibility for it and stuff, and they just really didn't have their shit together with security at all. I mean, it was just really, really awful, I think, in most regards. And so I'd gotten to a point where the only reason that I was going was to be everybody else's security. Some people would be super cool about it, and they would be like, oh, hey, you know, if you come over and do this with me, I'll go ahead and pay you. Others were like, you know, hey, would you mind going and attending with me? I don't really have anything, and I'd be fine with that as well. I didn't really give a shit. I just kind of wanted people to be safe. I didn't really care for the excess of drinking at TwitchCon. I didn't really care for the excess of drug use or anything like that. It just didn't really seem to be a terribly good convention to go to. You know, sex assault was a pretty regular occurrence on it, but when you would bring it up, often it would be swept under the rug. And so after a while, I just kind of stopped going to TwitchCon in general. I won't even accompany people to it anymore because the platform in general has kind of degraded to such a ridiculous extent that it just doesn't really feel like it's worth being there anymore. So after I had stopped going to the cons, I noticed that the platform in general had changed quite a bit, and it wasn't really that great, you know. I've always felt that Twitch as a platform has not generally been a generalized streaming platform. I felt that it was always for the gamers. We had other generalized platforms where you could go and make whatever kind of content you want, you know, for your generalized content. You know, we had YouTube and stuff. For your sexy content, you know, there's always Pornhub, there's Chatterbait, all that crap, whatever the hell you want to do. So I noticed at the time that there was a bunch of other demographics that had started to infiltrate the ecosystem. We had things like, first it was body painters, and I was like, okay, alright, I can consider that art, that's okay. A little bit of nudity, you know, just flag it as 18 and that's alright, you know, just cover up your nips, paint the rest of you, nobody gives a shit. And so I was okay with that. I got to go and see like a lot of people go and do some really interesting shit with their bodies, especially with like how they would go and utilize paint and stuff. Some of them would actually make really, really interesting pieces on their bodies and on their faces, and it was really cool. I enjoyed watching it for a while. Men, women, all that shit. I didn't care. Then they had brought politics and music onto the platform. Music was great. I loved watching people go and, you know, apply their craft and stuff and be really, really good at it. It was interesting watching other people make music, other people stream music. I would stream music on my channel from time to time. It wasn't a super common occurrence, but I did it and I enjoyed it. So with music, I was definitely okay with it. Politics, I felt, was kind of pushing it a little bit. I don't mind having a good political discussion and stuff, but I've always viewed Twitch as a platform where people go to relax and to have fun and enjoy gameplay, like all that stuff, you know. And so I felt like politics was kind of stretching it because there's a reason why we had an unspoken rule on Twitch where the majority of streamers would not allow politics to be discussed on their casts. And so it was mainly because it polarizes people too much. It's the same reason why a lot of Twitch streamers don't even bother to go and discuss things like religion, because it creates too many issues later on down the pike. I would allow people to discuss religion in my casts, but it had to be civil. The first time somebody fucked up, they were banned, more or less. And if it was two people, like, arguing instead of discussing, I would normally ban both of them, say fuck it, move on. And so politics, I feel, was kind of just pushing it a fair bit and everything else. And so then Twitch had kind of degraded a little bit further by going and, you know, the fabled hot tub streams, essentially. I'll be honest with you, if I want to have sexy time, man, there's Pornhub, there's Chatterbait, there's Xvideos, there's like all these other fucking platforms that I can go and watch this crap on. So it was really, really weird because hot tub streams had started cropping up around the same time as the just chatting streams. And so the just chatting streams were kind of interesting. It was just people bullshitting. I felt that a lot of just chatting streams were incredibly lazy because what they would do is they had this large tendency to go and watch other people's content on another platform and then react and talk about it. I kind of viewed it as the laziest form of fucking content creation. It's not something I'm ever likely to do. Like, I've had people ask me to go and make reactionary content, and I just kind of sit there and say no because I don't want to watch somebody else's shit and then react to it. It's very boring to me. So a lot of the just chatting streams, like, it was interesting because it was normally women that predominantly did it. There was a couple guys that were doing it too that were pretty prominent with it, but I felt that it was just very boring because you're watching another content creator's work while going and out and offering half-baked opinions on it. It just didn't really seem that great. And so this later on gave rise to the hot tub streams, which is just literally women in swimsuits going, sitting, and talking, and it just doesn't really... Well, to be honest with you, it's just fucking boring. There's not a lot of external reasons or anything. You know, I think it's kind of, as Twitch has grown as a platform, it is kind of progressively fucked with nudity. We saw it with the body painters, but at least with the body painters, you know, it was tastefully done, so it's not as bad. But we had a rise in incidences where, you know, you would have people that would be scantily clad, both, you know, guys and girls, that would go and do basically softcore porn on the platform. And I remember kind of just looking at it one day and saying to myself, damn, I really miss back when this was a gaming platform and when tournaments were all the rage. And I had just kind of quietly said in the back of my mind, if I want to watch shit like this, can't I just go to Chatterbait? You know, like, it was just such a very coherent thought that just kind of crept into the back of my mind a little bit. And so I understand that sex sells and stuff, but at the same time, you know, Twitch for me has always been a gaming platform. I know that there's going to be people that kind of try to push the argument of, well, everything changes and nothing ever stays the same, but the thing is Twitch really realistically should have a focus on gaming. I had grown tired of it, I think. My last stream on Twitch was way the fuck back in like 2019, and I just never really did anything with it. You know, after that, I just didn't really feel it was appropriate. I got tired of, you know, hearing about, you know, ex-streamer getting caught masturbating on stream because they quote forgot to end the stream. And then I had just gotten kind of sick of it. I said, God, man, they're not really doing jack shit to enforce this. You know, and you know, we have kids that go and get on the platform more or less, and yeah, you got your 18 plus bits. I mean, my cast was 18 plus for damn close to the entire duration of its existence, but at the same time, you know, like going and letting people do softcore porn, you know, and not really doing anything about it, or the streamer that goes and gets up and they casually bend over, you know, because they conveniently dropped something showing their ass and their slip and everything else. Like, it just gets really, really fucking obnoxious. And so it wasn't really what I thought a gaming platform should be, you know. Like, it was like a far cry of what it used to be and stuff, and I used to love getting on and watching tournaments and gameplay and just everything else, and then it just kind of became a generalized streaming platform with no real clear goal in mind, you know, and that's not something I really wanted to be a part of. I found that a lot of their larger casters, they would literally let them get away with hate speech simply because they're making money for the platform, but you would have smaller casters that would do some totally harmless shit and they would get banned for it. The moderation for the entire site was not done evenly. If you went and reported a problem, it would get answered like a month, sometimes a month and a half later. It's just once the Amazon buyout happened, everybody stopped giving a shit, you know, because they were more interested in making money and everything else. And then there was other issues as well, like the disparity with the cut in between small casters and large casters, and it was just kind of insane at that point. But on the opposite side of the coin, there was a lot of people that were very delusional going to Twitch thinking that, oh, I have like 1,600 followers, this is my job now. So, the problem with Twitch is that it is owned by a ridiculously large company and it has become too big to fail. It is a lot like YouTube in that regard, so you can literally do whatever, whenever, however, and it's not likely to go anywhere anytime soon. Twitch has had a whole slew of competitors in the past, and they normally die. I mean, we typically, we saw that with Beam, later known as Mixer. Microsoft gave up on that because Twitch was just pretty much undercutting everybody. And then we also have other platforms like Trovo and everything else, and again, those platforms aren't really doing super amazeballs either, you know. So I think the problem that I have with Twitch is that I tried to hold it up to too high of a standard. You know, like I got tired of hearing about, you know, casters going and like raping people that they met at cons, or I can't tell you how many times I heard about a caster being outed as a fucking child molester. Like it was just some really insane shit. And so past a certain point, I just kind of stopped giving a shit. You know, like I got tired of hearing about this crap all the time. Literally, like it was just really fucking awful in that regard. And a lot of people kind of treated it as a joke, I feel. They would just kind of sit down and be like, "Oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. It's not that bad." But, you know, a lot of the time it was fucking awful. There was numerous incidences of like casters going and flirting with fucking underage kids in their whispers, and nothing would ever happen, you know. So they would go and be like, "Hey, you know, this is not okay. What are you guys going to do about it?" And they would just simply never reply. I found that getting banned on Twitch was fucking ridiculous at times, you know, primarily because I would literally sit down and be like, okay, I went ahead and said fuck on stream. I was going and streaming Destiny with a friend of mine. We had lost the raid, and I was like, fuck, man. You know, that was awful. And I had copped a 1 week ban for saying fuck. Meanwhile, we have people that are just swearing excessively and nothing ever happens to them. And it was just really kind of obnoxious. Like, the amount of abuse that was going on the platform was fucking insane past a certain point. And when you go and you realize that shit's not really getting better, when you realize that it's like kind of devolving into a cesspool and stuff, it stops being fun. You know, now when I log into Twitch, I can normally expect to see half-naked human beings right there on the front page, and it's just really boring, man. You know, like, if other people love seeing shit like that all the time, that's great, but I just really miss back when I could log into Twitch and it was CSGO, League of Legends, just all of these incredibly popular games at the time that had competitions rolling and everything else. You know, like, if people want to do sexy shit on a platform, that's fine. We've got Pornhub, we've got Xvideos, we've got Chatterbait, we've got all of these other fucking platforms you can go to. There's not a lot of live streaming websites that cater directly to gaming. Twitch was one of them. So in many ways, I feel like once I had noticed that Twitch had become a generalized streaming platform, that there was kind of like a loss of innocence there. And then we also had like additional issues with the affiliacy program, how everybody would be really fast to get on the affiliacy program trying to make money. And a lot of people are like, well, you know, they made the affiliacy program because they care about their community. And that wasn't really so much the case. Like, when affiliacy had come out, I noticed it's back when they were trying to maintain financial viability for Twitch and boost their numbers. So basically it was like, okay, well, you've streamed a little bit. Like, when I had gained my affiliacy, the requirements were non-existent. Just straight up dead. Non-existent whatsoever. And so they'd be like, okay, well, you streamed a little bit, you have like 50 followers, here, apply for affiliacy so you can start making money. And I didn't really view this as so much a thing of, oh, look at how much they care about us. I kind of looked at it, and it was very easy to see that they were just trying to make money off of it, more or less, because a lot of people were like, well, hey, you know, partners make money and stuff, but they had noticed a lot of these smaller casters would go and resort to PayPal to accept donations and stuff. So they were like, well, you can sub to your favorite small streamer now. And then they had additional sources of monetization like bits and stuff. And, you know, they just over-monetized the platform all the high hell. I didn't really care for this too much because, like, I didn't really feel like giving half of everything I pretty much made at that point to a platform that would not even give me proper support if need be. So I'd gotten to a point where I was like, if you want to support me, just donate it. Don't even question it, just fucking donate it. And a lot of people had pissed that off because they were like, you know, they'd pissed off that entire idea completely. Because they would sit there and say, well, you owe this company so much because they do so much for you, but there had been plenty of times where I had literally gone and submitted complaints for like being stalked, harassed, things like that, and they didn't do anything. So there was a certain point where I said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get the fuck away from Twitch. And so I had started making pushes to get away from the community, to get away from the platform in general, primarily because a lot of what they were doing was too little too late. There was too much abuse on the platform, there was too much sexual assault on the platform. Moderation definitely was not good enough. There was various counts of abuse within the company itself. Most of them were aware of it. They chose to do nothing about it. And I just didn't want to be a part of that. Like I just felt like as a human being, I was like, yeah, this is fucking garbage. This shouldn't be happening. I don't know why the hell it's happening, but it's just not something that should be happening. And I had made the choice to literally go and spend my time elsewhere. One of the deciding factors was that even though I was an affiliate, when you go and you sit down and you actually read your contract, it blatantly states you cannot make content for anybody else, just us. And I had given up my affiliacy so fast with it, I was like, you know what, I'm fucking done. Like, I can't do this. And so I had gotten to a point where I was like, right, I would like to end my affiliacy. So it turns out there used to be a button for it that you could just cut it. And then they eventually, once people realized that they had no freedom and that they were migrating to other platforms, I noticed that button disappeared. And so now if you want to end your affiliacy, if you want to just like end the shit show right then and there, you have to manually reach out to support and then announce that you're ending your affiliacy. And then they will proceed to badger you with fucking questions about why you're doing it. And it's really weird because, like, when I was ending mine, the guy was like, well, why are you doing it? I said, I'm making the choice, too, because I want more freedom. The platform's not really doing anything for me. And I don't feel like being locked down to a single platform that expects me to exclusively make content for them while they're not doing jack shit for me. And so they would dive into other questions as well, like, well, do you make content for YouTube? That's none of your business. Do you stream on YouTube? That is also none of your fucking business. Are there any other streaming platforms that you're going to be moving to? None of your fucking business, And so I had ended my affiliacy and I was like, right, I'm on to bigger and better things. My content on YouTube got better because what they don't tell you is when you have content that is stored on Twitch, like old VODs and shit, assuming they haven't been deleted yet, and clips and things like that, part of your contract blatantly states you cannot use it on another platform without giving up your affiliacy. So I said, fuck it. I cut it, and I had started mass porting everything to YouTube because I wanted to create an archive. So with that freedom, I was kind of like, okay, we're going to do pretty cool things. And I feel like my content, as time has gone on, has gotten exponentially better. I mean, it's not super amazeballs. I don't have an entire production team in back of me, but the content has gotten better. So, that's pretty much what happened with Twitch and everything else, why I'm not on it anymore. Like, I don't even really watch people on it. I still have the fucking account. I just don't do shit with it. So, the final question that we're going to be going over with in this particular video is, I get this one a lot, like a hell of a lot. Do I support freedom of speech? Within reason. Like a lot of people, so as Americans, I think that we kind of fetishize the idea of freedom of speech. Like, we don't actually understand how it works, Like, you'll see an American go and scream, I believe in freedom of speech, every time they hear something that they don't really like, and then they say some out-of-pocket shit, and somebody calls them out on it. They'll say, I believe in freedom of speech, because they know that their ass is about to get grilled for it, right? But they just don't want the accountability, so they hide behind it. And so I firmly believe that Americans don't really understand what the fuck freedom of speech does. Freedom of speech protects you from the government. That's it. Just the government. You can go and badmouth the government as much as you want. You could be like, George Bush is a cocksucker, Obama is like bald with a fat fucking nose, and Donald Trump's face is falling off his body. Nobody gives a shit. But when it comes to society, that freedom of speech does not apply when it comes to having a job. freedom of speech does not apply. So a lot of people, I think, as Americans, really forget this. Like they'll go out into society and shit thinking they'll be able to say some racist out of pocket shit, thinking that it's not really going to go and do anything. But, they can't hide behind that. Like the law, the Constitution in general, does not protect you from generalized society. And a lot of Americans fail to realize this. Most of the time, when I see freedom of speech being invoked, it's normally when somebody is going and saying some out of pocket shit that they know is going to get their ass in trouble, some shit that they know that they shouldn't be saying. Most of the time, it's homophobic, transphobic, racist. It's not good shit that they're saying. Like, when you look at people and how they talk, right? You never, in your fucking foggiest, wildest wet dream, ever hear anybody who is saying decent shit bitch about freedom of speech. Why? Because they know that they're being a decent human being and that they don't really have to worry about it. They don't need to hide behind some kind of bullshit claim like that. With people that frequently do anything that is fucking awful, they are so quick to evoke and try to use freedom of speech as an excuse. Oh, I said some racist shit. Oh, that's fine. I believe in freedom of speech. And then they normally try to double down with it by saying, oh, let's agree to disagree because they can't really hold up their goddamn argument to save their fucking soul. So they'll sit there and scream freedom of speech. But in all honesty, I don't really think hate speech is freedom of speech. Like freedom of speech for me is normally just things that you would say normally under normal circumstances that people typically may disagree with but aren't outright caustic. I don't really view homophobia, transphobia, any sort of racism, sexism, things like that as free speech. And the reason for this is because hate speech cannot be free speech because it's frequently paid for at the cost of another's existence. That's how that is. It can't be free in that regard because another demographic is directly being harmed by caustic ideas. If you want an example of not of what holding not holding people accountable looks like, all you have to do is literally look at the Nazis in Germany. It's basically an example of what happens when people aren't like reined in at all. And so I think as a Jewish American, I would have really fucking loved it past a certain point if somebody would have told Adolf Hitler to go and shut the fuck up, or maybe had quietly said, hey, what this guy is saying is not right, what this guy is doing is not right. Maybe we should hold them accountable. I feel that way more people would be alive. That's really just where that's at for me. I never really understood how people could be so hateful towards one another on a pretty regular basis. And then when they get called out for it, they're just like, oh, well, free speech and all this other crap. It just never really vibed well with me. Fun fact, people don't have freedom of speech in the comments down here. I've touched down on it a couple of times, but hateful comments are not tolerated here. And a lot of people get really pissed with that. They're like, well, I'm allowed to have my opinion. And, they have this entitlement towards it. And it's like, when did being a fucking asshole become an entitlement? Honestly, like, I'm a fucking cunt, but there's even some things that even I won't say. And so I always found it really obnoxious because I would have people that would come into the comments, say some homophobic shit. I wouldn't even address it a lot of the time. I would just go and casually remove it and then proceed to forget about it. And then they would go and post more hateful shit, which at that point I was like, all right, dude, enough's enough. And I would just outright hide them from the channel because I felt like it wasn't other people's job to deal with their baggage. Like I've always viewed hateful people as people that were just kind of lacking a couple of extra brain cells. Maybe they're hurting more than the rest of us, but I've never really well tolerated them per se. And so when I sit down and, I do these videos and, I make this content and stuff and I release it, I want people to enjoy themselves. And I'll be honest with you, people can't really enjoy themselves if they're opening up the comments and seeing some, horribly charged bullshit. Like nobody wants to sit there and bitch about, nobody's going to have a good time bitching about somebody who left a racist comment in the comments. They're not going to, you know. So I always felt that if people were going to show up, if they were going to give me their time, energy, and their effort, that I needed to be able to, as a creator, provide a proper environment for them to thrive in. If I allow racist, homophobic, and transphobic shit in my comments, you know, like all that shit, if I allow that in my comments, that breeds an unhealthy environment. So as time has gone on, I have made it a habit of going and getting rid of bullshit comments out of my comment section. It has cost me a lot it has cost me a lot of subscribers. But strangely enough, I find myself being okay with that. You know, like a lot of people just kind of sit there and they're like, "Oh, hey, well, this is, just me exercising freedom of speech, and it's bad if you try to, hold me back from saying that." But in all honesty, I don't think it is. Like, it's just really kind of obnoxious, I think, how people have an entitlement towards being an asshole. And then, it's really weird how, like, that's the hill they choose to die on, you know? Like, human beings have limitless potential. There is so much amazing shit we can do in this world. And yet, the thing that we default to the most is being a fucking dick about shit. And so past a certain point, it used to be that I would go and I would just let negative comments go a lot of the times. Now I'm just a fucking cunt about it. Like, I embarrass the fuck out of people when I reply to them and stuff. I think the latest comment that I had banned was I had uploaded a clip for Resident Evil 5, and somebody had made the comment of Sheva being black, more or less referring to her as a quote quote big dumb monkey in a game. And I was like, dude, yeah, we're gonna have some fun with this. So I replied to him and I had embarrassed the fuck out of him. Didn't even bother to like the comment, and it had hit a nerve with him. And so he started coming at me full blast, and I was like, yep, we're gonna piss you off more, and I just hit him from the channel. Sometimes I am rather cunty like that, and it's really just kind of a strange thing. It's strange and it's slightly silly at the same time, like it's for people that scream, oh, freedom of speech, they really just don't like it when you exercise your own, in response to them. So I've taken a long time to go and tailor the kind of environment that I want to have down here, like the kind of exposure I want people to have, because I've got young folks that come and visit my videos and, visit my channel and watch my videos and stuff. And then I've got slightly older folks. I've got like a little bit of everybody that kind of chugs through here. And so I feel that, as an end result of that, it's my responsibility to breed a proper environment for people to actually go and enjoy themselves in. And if I have to lose a couple of people along the way because they're saying some candid out-of-pocket shit, I'm strangely enough okay with that. I always have been. I think, like, I never, when I had started this channel, I had never gone out of my way to try to monetize it. Like, I never kind of sat down and said, oh, hey, this is going to make me tons of money. I just kind of sat down and I said to myself, let's just make a place where people can hang out. Where people can go and hang out and chill and just kind of enjoy themselves, essentially. That was really, I think, where it was at for me. And so, in order to do that, it starts with being willing to have the backbone to be like, what you're saying is fucked up, you're out of here. It's not going to do you any favors. You're going to be weeding out a lot of people, but I think breeding a proper environment for people to go and enjoy themselves in is way more important. At least to me, it's important. I want people to have a good time when they come out here. I want them to go and look at me and all the fucking stupid bullshit I'm doing, and I want them to just get a base grade laugh. So, the final question, I forgot that I had another one, the last one on the docket, because that text is really fucking small. A lot of people frequently ask me where I stand with politics and stuff. Do I like discussing it? Do I not like discussing it? Because people will hear me talk about it occasionally and then address it in the, in the comments, usually. Long story short, I'm an anarcho-communist, apparently with a really bad speech impediment. And I've been like that for a while. Growing up as a kid, I was a lot more ignorant. Used to be hardcore Republican because I was brainwashed with heavy amounts of patriotism growing up in my house. It was a very much so an America, fuck yeah kind of household. And so I was raised that, you be conservative because America's great and you want to conserve that. And I was like way younger and a hell of a lot dumber back then. And so as I got older, what wound up happening essentially is I started paying attention to my environment. That was the nail in the coffin for me being a Republican. I was like probably 12 years old. And at the time, we had our first really large, disaster in a really long time. And people were without food and this and that and everything else. And so I would just kind of go and I would look and I would just stare. As awful as that sounds, I would literally just go and stare, like hardcore fucking laser beam sort of stare. And I would watch as Democrats would try to go and take care of people, provide food aid and things like that, and Republicans would be like, you need to get up off your ass, get a job, this and that, stop expecting handouts. I had stopped being a Republican once I had noticed the excessive amount of cruelty, more or less. And it was really weird because I was only like 12 years old. When you're like 12 years old, you shouldn't even really be worrying about this crap because you're 12. You have no real fucking concept of it, right? But I had seen the cruelty and stuff, and I was just kind of looking at it at the time, and I just kind of said to myself, this isn't really great. These people really shouldn't be being treated like this. And then another thing that had really kind of bothered me about the Republican Party, even way the hell back then, was it was kind of odd how they had to weasel religion into everything. Being an ex-Christian myself, and recognizing the discrepancies, per se, of the church. I didn't really think, because I was always raised that church and state was supposed to be separate, I found that it was incredibly oddball how Christianity was kind of tied to Republicans' hips a lot of the time, and I didn't really care for that too much. So I had progressively left that movement, and I had, past a certain point, started to drift over to leftism. I think I was apolitical up until the time I was 14, 15, and I had started looking into leftism, which also has its problems as well, especially when you start looking at certain aspects of Maoism, Leninism, things like that. And I believed in a lot of the core ideology and stuff in terms of people going and getting paid well, which is largely socialist, as well as everybody having the right to medical, food, water, housing, your general stuff that you would need just to survive. But a lot of people didn't really like that. My family was very, very strict when it came to it and stuff, and then there was also a fair bit growing up in the 80s, I think, that post-Cold War stench was kind of just hanging around in the air still. So growing up, the Red Scare never really left. I don't think Americans very much so still firmly live in the fear of the leftist boogeyman, more or less. They're well, communism is bad because Russia is communist and look at them, they're bad. And I found a lot of people, when they would go and discuss politics, they wouldn't really say anything terribly intelligent. A lot of the time it was kind of brainless fear-mongering, more or less, and I didn't really care for that too much. I see that with a lot of right-wingers in general. They don't really have good arguments. They just kind of try to use these half-baked end results, and I don't really like that too much, you never hear any Republicans going, any right-wingers in general going and having any sort of solid argument, any sort of argument that has any sort of factual basis. Normally when you ask them, okay, pull this fucking statistics, they're well, I don't have it, or you can go and look it up. Every argument that I have had, well, any debate that I've attended, I've had all my shit in a row, you know? And so I think it's kind of weird because I've never really cared for right wing crap in general because it's always rooted in fear and other maladaptive tendencies and various other fucking things that I've noticed. I didn't really, with most right wingers, I noticed that there is a large amount of xenophobia as well as a strong presence of nationalism. Both I view as incredibly unhealthy, you know. So with nationalism, it frequently leads to fascism, and then with xenophobia, it's not even rooted in anything productive. I mean, there's no real reason to fear other cultures. As somebody that spends the majority of their time around other people in other cultures, these people are harmless. And I think that kind of really was hammered in when 9/11 happened. Like, a lot of people in the country, like, their xenophobia just fucking shot the straight out when it came to, Muslims and stuff. And I remember growing up as a kid, being in an apartment block, with my mom, going and realizing that these Muslim people were actually really fucking beautiful and great to be around. Like, we had a Muslim couple that lived a couple doors down, and like, her kids were great. He was great, and she was always like stuffing me with food. It was fucking ridiculous. Like, being a chunky bitch when I was growing up, I would always go over there and she's like, "Oh, you look so thin. Are you hungry?" And it's like, dude, there's nothing thin about me. Like, I would just kind of sit there and I would just kind of sit there and I would spend my time with these other cultures. And the more that I had globalized, the more that I had spent time around other people, the more I realized that, it wasn't generally the people that we were fearing, it was the extremists in those people, in those factions and stuff that were going and harming others and everything else. So I just kind of left right wing ideology behind, and the older I got, the more I became a leftist. I do a lot of reading on it. I am definitely a fan of Kropotkin and a lot of his works. I am fully aware of the inherent flaws in leftism, especially when you start looking at things like the lumpy proletariat and everything else. That's definitely shit that had to go. Not really much of a fan of tankies. Don't really care for just certain aspects of my own demographic, and, that's okay. You know. But yeah, I don't really talk politics that much. I'll talk politics with my sister and stuff. We have a tendency to talk about leftist shit quite often and various other ideologies. But as far as, I've been going and dabbling in politics, most people that I've seen from the other side of the aisle, they've pretty much been motivated and driven by fear and hate and everything else. And I think as a human being, I really just don't have a lot of room for that in my soul. Like, I know people that kind of like latch onto their politics and make it like their entire identity and stuff, but to be honest with you, I just have no real desire for it. I just kind of want to be a decent human being, take care of others, do the best that I can, and that's pretty much it. That's all I really want, that's all I really need. So, with that thought in mind, this is literally the last of the questions that I had planned for this video. I'm not sure how many more videos I got left to go because I'm still sorting through questions and figuring out which ones are asked the most. So for all those that came and hung out tonight, sorry, that speech impediment's fucking killer. For all those that came and hung out tonight, I greatly appreciate your time and your effort and stuff. I hope you enjoyed this content. If you didn't, that's fine too, So, as always, till next time, and be good to yourselves and each other. Hi guys, good evening. I am back with another round of Raimes mailbag and stuff, and I think that this episode is going to be a little bit more mental health centric because I have gotten quite a few questions about it across various points in time that I've always just kind of swept under the rug, and with Raimes mailbag focusing around answering questions that you guys frequently ask me, I knew that this was going to be happening at some point. So these next two episodes are going to be focused around my mental health journey, basically how I got here, where I'm going, my overall experience, do I recommend therapy, hooking up with a clinic, things like that. So this is going to cover, first and foremost, the experience, and after hearing my experience, you can either make the choice on whether it is or isn't for you. So, I've had mental illness pretty much my entire life. It had started from a very young age because I grew up in an incredibly toxic and abusive environment. There was just a lot of really awful stuff that had happened, and so as a consequence of this, I kind of ended up with DID and BPD. Well, the BPD didn't really start showing up until, I'd have to say, my teens, and then the DID, I think, was latent for a while, and it just kind of got progressively worse with age until it became very, very evident. When I was a small child, they had tried enrolling me in all kinds of therapies and stuff, and it really just wasn't great. The first therapy they had tried on me that I can remember was play therapy, where, there's like toys and stuff that were around, and it wasn't really my thing, I don't think. Like, it wasn't really doing anything for me, because at the time, if I had been a little too liberal with my mouth and be like, hey, I have awful things going on at home, my family was very quick to pull me from it because they were more worried about their self-image at that point than actually going and getting me help and helping me resolve it and stuff. So I was actually pulled from that therapist really, really quickly. In high school, our guidance counselor actually doubled as a therapist as well at times. And so I would go in and I would talk to her because life was still relatively hellish at home, and then I was starting to wrestle with multiple issues regarding my mental health, and, nobody really wanted to take me into a clinic to actually go and have me looked at and stuff and everything else. And so things after a while had started to deteriorate. So 2017 had rolled around. And up at this point, I had been in and out of my fair share of relationships. I had seen multiple therapists. None of them I stuck with very long because quite a few of them were actually very, very sketchy. And so I had one that tried to force herself on me. I had another one that was just bad at what he did. And so I would just kind of bob in and out, and eventually I had just stopped going. It was very time consuming, very costly, and past a certain point you're just, when the care is bad, you're kind of like, alright, why am I sitting here doing this, more or less. And so 2017 had rolled around. I was in the middle of my last engagement and stuff, and it just wasn't really going well. There was a lot of mental abuse, emotional abuse. And so finally I had just kind of sat down one day and I said to myself, things aren't really getting any better. I was taken in initially to the ER for having a really bad raging infection in my ear. And what wound up happening is the nurse was talking to me at the time, and I had let slip that I just hated my life and I was just kind of ready to die and be done with it, more or less. And, well, it turns out when you say some candid shit like that in the emergency room, they have a tendency to pay attention to it. So they eventually came back, and there was security in tow. And I remember just kind of going and turning my head in their direction. I said, oh, this is really weird. And the nurse was like, all right, big guy, we're going to have to go and you can't be saying stuff like that around us, so we can either go and you can either come with us willingly, or we can go and just hold on to you for a couple of days against your will. And I was like, okay, do you guys think that I need it? And they're like, well, you're depressed, you're not stable. We think that it would be a good idea if you would go to the 4th floor for a while, which is basically where the orders are. And we think it's in your best interest. Well, I may be stubborn, but I do listen to reason a lot of the time. And so I was like, okay, I had decided at that point that things really just weren't getting any better, and so I said, maybe now is the time to succumb to it. Essentially, maybe they can do it better than everybody else had done it, and so I agreed. They took me up, examined my body for cuts and wounds and things like that, snapped a photo of me, and then stuck me in some scrubs, more or less, and gave me a room for the evening after going and giving me some shots to calm my ass down, because my anxiety was just running in an unchained fashion. At that point, I was kind of just bouncing off the walls. So they had kept me for a month, and at the time I was seeing a psychiatrist named Sushka Caperna, and she had diagnosed me with BPD as well as DID over the month that they had me. And so at the time, I had just kind of laughed at it when they told me that I didn't know what BPD was, and I didn't know what DID was either. With BPD, they're like, you have extreme emotional instability, and you also have a fair bit of psychosis, that you need to work on and stuff. You also appear to be extremely anxious, and at other times extremely depressed. And so I was like, okay. And then with DID, the way that they had explained it, they were like, your mind has been fractured from abuse, and you have developed multiple personalities as an end result. And I thought it was the biggest load of shit, so I kind of just laughed at it and said to hell with it, and then just focused on getting treatment for the BPD, more or less. I was not a believer in DID at all. Still in a fair bit of denial about it, per se. So I was held on to it for a month. My ex-fiance at the time didn't bother to check on me. Nothing like that, just not one fuck was to be had. No phone call, no nothing. Found out later that she was cheating, and which, okay, whatever. It happened. I don't really approve of it, but, people be like that sometimes. They were going and getting ready to release me. And so I was just kind of sitting there, and I was like, okay, well, where do I go from here? And they had a super thick stack of paperwork that they were kind of sitting there, and they were like, all right, well, we're going to hook you up with a therapist. You can either go to CBIS, which is Southeast Arizona Behavioral Health Services, or we can find you a independent therapist to go and see that focuses on being trans and everything else. And I said, okay, that's fine. I had heard really awful things about CBIS, and so I was very hesitant to actually go to CBIS as a consequence of that. And so I said, okay, I'll see a private therapist and stuff. At the time, Medicaid hadn't really expanded yet, because I was a broke bitch back then. And so getting a therapist outside of a clinic was damn near impossible. So I was going and seeing a gentleman named Jeffrey Trujillo in my hometown for a while, and he focused on trans issues and stuff and everything else, and he was working around the budget that I had at the time, being on disability, which was $60 a session. And I was like, okay. We basically had an hour, and he wanted to focus on my transition, more or less, and getting me hooked up to drugs and everything else, while transitioning is very, very expensive. And so at the time, I knew that I needed therapy, but I didn't really know what I wanted to get out of therapy. if that makes sense. I was like, okay, I know I need the help. I just don't know what I'm chasing at this point. I don't know what to do. And so I had stopped seeing Mr. Trujillo in its entirety because, one, I didn't know what I want, but I'm not tired, am I? I had a rough idea somewhat. I was like, okay, I don't really know what I completely want, but I know that, like, I knew enough to know that it wasn't currently what was going on, what I was receiving, because we were focusing more on transitioning and getting hooked up with a bunch of doctors and all this stuff. Like, it almost felt like it was trying to rope me into the pharmaceutical side of things, and I just kind of said to myself, okay, I don't need this right now. I wanted to focus on actual problems in my life, so I just didn't bother to return and stuff, and it was really just, I think, it was for my betterment, in all honesty, because if I would have gone down that path, things would have been really, really awful, and I don't think I would have ever really bounced back from it, in all honesty. And so I ran around, I ran around clinicless for like another 6 months, and I had ended up in the ER again, and they were like, well, did you go to therapy? And I was like, I had tried it wasn't for me. So they recommended CBIS again. They're like, well, it's changed, it's not the same that it used to be. And so I was like, okay, alright, that's fine. I went ahead and I placed, I was deferred out to the clinic, and I didn't hear back for like a month. And so finally I decided to call, like, oh yes, we have your referral right here. My doctor was, I was seeing Mrs. Lodge at the time out in Douglas, and she was like, it's important for you to get into therapy. I don't want a dead patient, more or less, And so I was like, that's fair. I had gotten set up with CBIS, and the wait time was really, really long. We were approaching November of that year, and it was really, really bad. Like, the entire time my ex was just kind of like weary of me going to therapy and getting mental health services, while she continuously kind of blamed her entire life on me. But I decided to keep the appointment. I had my intake appointment. I was diagnosed very early on with BPD. Didn't even bother to tell them about the DID because I didn't believe in it. And so the intake was completed. We went over what all, we have to do, more or less, things we're going to be working on, services I'm going to be getting, things like therapy, case management, medication, things like that. And so I was like, okay, here we go. And after intake was done, I proceeded to go home and wait for another 2 months. So everything was going and moving pretty fast, I think. It was moving a lot faster than what I was ready for. Therapy scared the hell out of me, so anybody that knows me well knows that I have really bad abandonment issues, and so I trust no one. I do not let people get close. I go, and I think I have, like, on one hand, the amount of people that I'm actually close to. And so with therapy, you kind of have to get close to the person you're talking to. If you have no rapport there, if there's no closeness, then you're not really going to be talking about much of anything. And things are not going to progress. So I was like, okay. At the time, well, actually, it's not even so much at the time thing. I continue to see her to this day. I was seeing seeing a woman named Nicole Small. And it was really strange because my vision is, like, really, really bad. So I didn't realize that I was so much bigger than she is. So the first time she had popped out, she in a very mousy tone was like, "Rain?" And I was just like, eh? And I was just kind of like looking around, because I, at the time, had extremely long hair and it was always in my face. And then sometimes I would also be busted napping in the waiting room, which hindsight probably wasn't my best thing. So we had started going and doing therapy together and stuff, and I was very, very hesitant. And I still have a lot of anxiety, I think, towards everything, but it's not as bad. And so we had started the therapy aspect of things, and I feel that it's always been a boon to me. Even though I have like a lot of anxiety and things like that, I feel that it's always been a boon. Everything else in the clinic was a fucking nightmare. I don't like when I say that it was a nightmare, it was a literal fucking nightmare. So they had me seeing a bunch of psychiatrists at the time as well to get on proper meds. I was not opposed to medication, but I was opposed to medication that simply just does not work or does not do anything for me. At the time, I was listing off my symptoms, and they said, well, it's either bipolar or schizoaffective or just standard schizophrenia, and so I was kind of going through the medication aspect of it for a while, and I found that a lot of the people down there on that wing of things were incredibly transphobic. A lot of them still believing that being trans is a mental illness that you would typically tackle with a ton of drugs. Well, this has been kind of outdated for a while now. The DSM was updated quite a while back. They got rid of that. And so it really had, I feel, no place being at the clinic. It's like saying, oh yeah, here's, you're gay, here's some Thorazine, you know. And so we went through a battery of, for lack of a better term, we went through an entire battery of medications. Eventually we settled on Seroquel, which was a very massive fucking mistake. It was good, but it was bad. So they had eventually just stuck with the diagnosis of BPD with psychotic features and a couple of other things, and so I was like, okay, I guess this is my life now. At the time I was trying to tell them that there was like faint voices, and that's where the schizophrenia came from, because I thought that it was just base grade psychosis. Eventually my belief would shift to the idea that I had so much trauma on me that it was psychosis that I couldn't fix with meds. And then eventually later on, when I would do more investigating and a fair bit of reading into my records and stuff, I would learn that it is DID. More or less, it's just my alters occasionally talking to me, and I just didn't know. I thought it was a hallucination. So we went through a ton of medication for a while. It wasn't really going anywhere. Eventually I had settled on Seroquel. We had tried Depakote and a couple of other medications like Remeron and things like that, and it just wasn't really working for me. Eventually they had tried lithium, and the only thing the lithium did was make my eyeballs bounce up and down. And so it was a very kind of surreal experience, I think. And then the environment that I was in was hostile as well. A lot of the time they were late. If you called and you were trying to go and be kind to people, a lot of the times they would just be kind of snotty. The only real stable aspect that I had with Cebus was my therapist, weirdly enough. Which hindsight it makes sense because I feel that we do good work together and stuff, even though I have my own fair share of baggages, and she hasn't killed me yet, so I must be doing something right. Um, but all joking aside from therapy, case management was a mess. I never knew who my case manager was. The work culture at Cebus was so bad that they were basically cycling employees all the time. Literally all the time. It wasn't getting better, it was getting worse because they were overworked, underpaid, and then expected to do many jobs while they were there, and it wasn't really fair to them. So I never knew who my case manager was. I was swapping out psychiatrists all the time. All of this crap, 9 times out of 10, would happen against my will. I encountered a fair bit of transphobia, a fair bit of homophobia. And so eventually I said, I really just don't want anything to do with this. I'd spoken to my therapist about it, and I said, this is not great. This is not how this should be. And she kind of understood my frustration for it. So COVID hit. The breakup had pretty much left me a wreck. I was trying to go and deal with the COVID outbreak, and at the time it just wasn't really going over too well and stuff. We had moved over to telehealth. And around this time, since, I had the time, I had started opting for various procedures to fix my body. We had started with my legs and stuff, and um, fixing the joints in them, and a lot of vascular surgery, and just things I had to have because a lot of things on me were just not functioning correctly at all. So my therapist and I had moved over via telehealth. I was given the option of either telehealth or video chat. And I just kind of said to myself, I'm not really one for video chat. Let's just go ahead and do telehealth. This is fine. I had noticed that there was problems with my clinic at this point, more problems than usual. I had started, so my insurance company at the time typically likes to send out forms asking me to rate the services that they receive and stuff. And I had kind of sat there and said, oh, okay, well, I would fill them out in great detail and I would send them back. Well, Cebus was also going and asking a bunch of oddball questions as well. Like I would get phone calls asking me if I was satisfied with my therapist, and I would always sit there and say yes. And then I would always get phone calls asking me if I would like to file complaints as well. And I never really understood why. The woman that is treating me currently is very family orientated, would require days off here and there because she would have family issues at home regarding various things that were happening in her personal life. So she'd be like, hey, I need to take care of so and so today. Can you, do you mind, not doing the appointment? I'd be like, yeah, not a problem. Fuck it. Go take care of your kids, man. Like I just really just kind of sat there for a while and, I always told my therapist that it was okay. We had other weird occurrences that the clinic itself would go and complain about. And it would be like, well, you know, um, she was late for this or late for that. And, it felt like they were always like trying to attack her, which was very oddball to me. Like it didn't really ever feel warranted because if I was dissatisfied with things, I would have swapped off. If I didn't want to be there, I wouldn't bother picking up the phone. There's just like a lot of things that I would have not been doing at the time. So this had gone on for months. I had swapped out case managers again, would receive routine phone calls asking me if I would like to file a complaint. I would again say no. And eventually it was happening so much, I had brought it up to my insurance company and I said, what do I do about this? My insurance company was like, well, if you want, we can go and we can investigate it. We can file a complaint. And when we file a complaint, that would launch an investigation that we can go and look at, and see what's going on with it. So I said, okay. The wheels were very slow to turn on that, and it wouldn't really start heating up until like last year. So we were mid COVID pandemic and stuff, and eventually she had sat there and she was like, "Hey, Rame, we have 7 sessions left." I thought I was being fired because I'm a dumbass like that, and I had said to myself, "Oh fuck, what did I do wrong?" And she was very eloquent about it. She's like, "Hey, I've been doing this for like 20 years." And I just kind of want to go and do my own thing. I want to have my own business more or less. And I said, you know what, I can respect that. I had a little bit of a knee jerk reaction because abandonment issues. And so I wanted to keep continuity of care going. So I wound up in a very short time asking a slew of questions, all of them scary as fuck. Because I am a creature of habit. I do not like change. Well, that's a lie. I don't mind change, but it has to be like planned change. So I went ahead and I was like, well, do you plan on accepting my insurance? I was expecting a no, but I eventually found out she's like, yes, I will have to sign up for it and everything else. And I said, okay, that's great. So I had started the transitionary process. And so she's like, I'm not going to be approved for a while. Here's my number. Feel free to call me X amount of months down the road. So I was told that we had 7 sessions left, so I was kind of like counting them down. She was gone after 3. I would learn that this would later be a habit for the entire clinic because a case manager that I had that I was actually really just amazing with had the same issue. He's like, I'm going to be your case manager for like another 2 months, and he was gone a couple weeks later. So I just kind of sat there and I said, fuck, for a while. Nicole and I had started the transition process, and I didn't realize that this would be the most horrible aspect of my mental health life. She does good work. I feel that I do good work a lot of the time, although I'm not always easy to be around because I have a lot of anxieties, and I feel it kind of dominates things sometimes against my will, not of all things. And so she was like, you're going to have to wait. If you're having any issues, call me. And I had greatly appreciated everything that she was putting forth for me and stuff. And so I was like, okay, if I have any problems, I'll go ahead and call you. When in reality, I was like, don't call her, you're gonna sound very needy. But she was trying to be kind. Well, she was being kind. There was no trying about it. She was being kind. I just had anxiety towards it. So I had started the waiting process to wait for her to get her business warmed up and to get certified for my insurance and everything else. And it was a long while. It was like, fuck, man, 4 months, 4 or 5 months of no maintenance. And so there was this very huge time lapse where everything was just really awful. So I had started the process of collecting my records, the first shot around, and Cebus was just not really willing with me. I was like, okay, I would like to collect my records. They had asked me why. It was kind of a shit show from start to finish. I said I'm looking for continuity of care. At the time, I was extremely worried about coming off as creepy, so I had asked a much older therapist who was retired, who was the mom of a friend of mine. I said, is it creepy to want to stick with your therapist to finish the journey, because I like to finish things when I start. And she had said no. Continuity of care is very normal. Told me to request a continuity of care document as well as all of my records, and then go from there, more or less. And so I said, okay. I went ahead, requested all the records, the continuity of care document, all that stuff, and they were like, well, you can just go and see somebody here. And I said, well, I like the therapist that I'm with. I feel that we mesh well together, very well. I would like to just continue my journey with her. I started this with her. I would like to wrap it up with her. And they didn't really like that at all. It was a great source of stress because they were going and fighting me tooth and nail about it. And so it was just this kind of bloodbath of sorts, and I didn't really care for it. Upper management was a fucking train wreck. I would try to address things with them multiple times. I literally got nowhere. That would end up happening much later down the line. So I had struggled with it for a while. I had finally gotten my records. I had finally gotten my continuity of care documents. And I was literally just kind of sitting there and saying, hey, here we go, let's just go ahead and, get this hammered out, more or less. And the entire time they were just kind of badgering me about seeing somebody else, and it would go from requesting me to see somebody else to flat out attacking her sometimes. They would say like some really fucked up shit, like, well, we have better therapists, like I would kind of sit there and I would just fucking stare at this shit. It was really fucking bad, man. Like, I would be like, better, like, what makes them better? And I would ask this question and they would never have an answer for me. And so eventually I came to the conclusion that they're just trying to retain me. And then I was probably witnessing a low-grade smear campaign, so I had started distrusting them right then and there. I had called Nicole and I said, alright, hon, I don't know what you have going on, I'm not sure how the hell to do this. Are you ready? Like, what are we doing? Like, I was going about it in a very haphazard fashion because I'm a weird fuck like that sometimes. And so she was like, I'm not quite ready yet. I'm hoping to be ready by the end of the month. Well, she was golden in like 2.5 weeks. So I had reestablished care with her and stuff. I had started boxing my records because at the time I had no print equipment, no ability to scan, nothing. And it was just the craziest, most haphazard dog shit that I had ever done. So we eventually, I did intake with her and stuff, and I kind of felt like the ghost of Sebus would be like haunting us for a very long time. And so we had continued the care plan that we had together over Sebus and stuff. I was like, I need maintenance and to go and tackle things and, you know, things like that. And I had an SMI designation at the time, which I still carry to this day, and so I was entitled to have these services. And so it was just really kind of this oddball thing because there was just a lot of anxiety. Finally, I decided to tackle my clinic directly. I was still getting case management services over there as well as meds and everything else. Eventually, they had started getting pissed off because I had surgery on my feet, and the part of the healing process was I had 2 huge-ass medical boots, one on each foot, while the bones of my feet had healed from various fusion surgeries because all of the joints of my feet were fucked from just years of wear and tear and arthritis and everything else. It was just really fucking rough. And so the entire time they would check in with me. And I was like, okay, well, thank you for checking in. Still not ready. I found out that... So I wound up buckling last year. And they wound up taking me off of Seroquel because it was dropping my blood pressure so damn low that my heart just decided, oh, hey, I just want to stop. And that's not great, you know, because I gotta survive this crap. And so I had gone to the ER, and they had taken me off the medication and stuff. I had called my case manager, whose name was Zach at the time, and I said, hey man, I'm gonna have to come off these meds cold turkey because it is dropping my blood pressure down to rather insane levels. If I stay on these meds, I will die. That is how this is. And he was like, hey, not a problem, hon, you know, go ahead and do it and we'll catch back up. I got news later that he was leaving the clinic, and so he was like, you know, we'll go ahead and stay in touch if you want, and I knew that it wasn't going to happen. He was a cool dude, dedicated family man, ex-military, all that shit. But I knew that he was writing checks with his mouth that I would literally never be able to cash, primarily due to company policy and everything else. So I went ahead and decided that I was going to cool for a while. No meds, just no nothing with Sebus, the occasional check-in, and that was pretty much it while my body healed. So I just kind of... I had to have my feet in these big-ass boots for like 4 fucking months. And so I was sitting there and I was like, alright man, you know, we're gonna go ahead and do this. And once a month Sebus would call and they're like, you know, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm at home, waiting to heal up more or less, and I gotta let the Seroquel wash out of my system. Quitting Seroquel cold turkey is very fucking rough. I do not sleep correctly as an end result, and it was just really fucking awful. Like, just some of the worst fucking shit. When you're on it, it's bliss. You will sleep so good. So fucking good. But when you're off of it, nothing functions right. It's almost like Seroquel is a glue that kind of knits everything together, and it's really nice. I was doing really well on it, but when it's dropping your blood pressure, it's dropping your blood pressure. So I went through an extended withdrawal period while on it, and I'm still getting some withdrawal symptoms to a certain extent, but it was incredibly rough. Still is, a little bit. I had continued my therapeutic life, and a lot of what was going on with Sebus was kind of bleeding into it. Eventually, my case manager had, my new one had called me and asked me, you know, what I was doing. And I said, well, hon, you know, I'm still healing up and stuff. and I'm trying to let Seroquel wash out of my system. On average, it takes about a year to like really start putting a dent in it, and so I felt that I was a long ways off. I was still getting intestinal pain and nerve issues and everything else. My heart was still kind of flip-flopping around every now and then. It would just kind of randomly freak out. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be doing this for a while. I kind of accepted it as a fact of life, and I started focusing on the surgical aspect of my medical life, fixing up my limbs, fixing up the vasculars in my legs. Like, I wanted to get back on the horse, and I was like, okay, to do this, I have to have these surgeries. So I had a lot of downtime. My therapeutic life had more or less continued and stuff. Eventually, the clinic manager had called me from CBIS, and they had asked me what I was doing as a patient. I said, okay, well, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. My therapist and I have established a plan in case I go and have any sort of discrepancies. You know, we've got that squared away. Like, me and Nicole were putting in so much work to go and create a proper environment for me to exist in, with mechanisms in place and safety nets and everything else. And so, eventually, she had gotten pissed at this because they were like, you know, are you still pursuing therapy? I said, absolutely. And I would just tell them Nicole's name and stuff. I'd be like, hey, you know, I'm still pursuing therapy with Mrs. Spall, and, you know, I plan on doing it for the foreseeable future. I would try to be kind about it, even though there was like a large portion of me that is like, this is literally none of your fucking business. But as a clinic that's trying to run case management, they have the right to know. So I was like, okay, you know, we're going to go ahead and just be honest about it. And so the clinician manager was not really kind about it, like, at all. Like, just did not care for this woman at all. And I had never really had any sort of, even to this day, I've never had really any sort of negative experience with Nicole. You know, just the clinic was being a bunch of assholes for the sake of being a bunch of assholes, and I just didn't really care for it too much. And so eventually, when they realized that you're not coming back, this particular clinic would do a lot of, I guess, emotional blackmail to a certain lesser extent. You know, well, we would prefer to handle everything in-house, and eventually the clinical manager was like, hey, you know, you've more or less been abandoned by her, you know, and there's nothing that is going to come out of this, more or less, because you shouldn't be there. This had ratcheted my anxiety up so fucking high that it was insane. I was like, fuck, man, really? You know? And so I had doubts about therapy, which I am still struggling with, because this shit would just kind of keep going. And so eventually I would get around to asking her, because for me, asking people questions can be very horrifying, especially if I've ever been vulnerable with them, because I am excessively worried about being stabbed emotionally. Like, I'm pretty tough outside, but inside, ooh, hell no. So I had asked her, I said, hun, is there any truth to this? You know, like, if there is, that's fine. I just kind of want a straight answer. And she was like, no, I just didn't want to be there. And, you know, it's like, okay, that's fair, because I knew that they weren't really treating her great to begin with, and it was like a lingering gut suspicion that I had had for a very long time. And so we had literally cleared the air. I had started the process of washing my hands of CBIS, and I still had like an open complaint with them and everything else, and my insurance was following up pretty routinely, because when my insurance goes and asks questions, you know, they're expecting a resolution, because, you know, government contracted and all that. So things weren't really getting better. It was actually getting worse. My therapeutic life was still functioning as normal, as it typically does, but everything else, clinic side, was just really, really bad. Like, they pretty much treated everybody like shit. They didn't really have anything, you know, particularly kind to say about her. It seemed like a little bit of a smear was going on, and I just didn't really like it that much. So eventually I would have to follow up with the complaint. And the complaint in general, it was basically, hey, I don't really feel like I'm getting the quality of service that I feel that I deserve. I view a lot of this as being grossly unprofessional. There hasn't really been a lot of really good staff conduct, and so when I would go and pursue this, I would fill out everything in detail. Because when I go and do things like this, I like to make sure that everything is done right. I don't like to understate, overstate, nothing like that. So I had, for a very long time, was very matter of fact about everything. I was like, yeah, this is what happened, this is what's going on. The complaint would eventually ratchet up, and it would lead to some pretty fucking fantastically awful things. So when you go and you request your records, on your records, they don't have a tendency to give you what's called office notes. And a lot of the time, office notes are incredibly revealing because they, a lot of the time, have a tendency to be out of pocket. And, it wasn't really super great, so my insurance company was like, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and pull everything, see what's going on, and in the state of Arizona, you can also pull office notes. So I was going and I was entering the phase of doing backups of everything, and I had started running across the office notes for pretty much everything. And at this time, I was still getting routine calls every month asking me what I was doing. And so eventually, even though I was still being worked on at the time, eventually I was like, I'm waiting to heal, guys. I can't go into the clinic. And so they're like, well, you're expected to come in because we're running case management. But the thing is when you're constantly going through a lot of leg surgery and vein stripping and everything else, you're in bed a fair bit. You don't exactly get the luxury of getting up and walking around like you want to, but you just don't have access to it. So they force terminated me at that point. The clinic manager, the clinical manager was literally just kind of sitting there going, hey, do you feel your treatment at CBIS is complete? I said, no, I'm waiting to heal. They can't be anyways. And that wound up going into the complaint that I had lodged with my insurance company as well. And so we had started the process all over again, more or less, in terms of my mental health life. My therapist was fully aware of it, and, I bitched about it in quite a few sessions and stuff. And we had gotten to a point where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to be running around without medication. We need to start thinking of better mechanisms and stuff, and we had worked on it really hard. We had created a toolbox that would be formulated around those specific needs. So I had requested my records and I had received the office notes. Eventually this had caught the attention of pretty much everybody, and when I was reading the office notes, I was supposed to be on a certain dosage of Seroquel 2 times a day, and I found out that they were literally going and having me take damn near double the amount, saying that they needed to basically keep people with BPD passive, more or less. And I sat there and I had shit my pants because I was effectively being overdosed on Seroquel. And I had just kind of said to myself, oh, Jesus Christ, this explains, how the hell I had ended up in the ER with, everything just kind of flatlining. And it wasn't really that great. It became a very public thing. And I had just started kind of pursuing everything. And so I had found out that the clinical manager that was going and handling everything was very fond of lying about a lot of stuff. So when I was going through my office notes and everything else, there was a large section in there about me and my therapist and how the clinic manager felt that we were underperforming, but I felt that I was progressing at a very reasonable pace. I knew that I was going to have to be in it for the long haul. And so I was like, okay, we're going to take our time with it because it's better to do it right than to do it fast. And so it was a couple of pages spread out throughout the entire Office Note document talking about how she was more or less weaning her clients off of her and trying to have them diverted to other therapists and stuff, and then just other shit that really should have not had any right to be in there. There was also a handful of notes that it was alleged were written by her and stuff, but on the notes there are frequently signatures. And when I had gone and looked at my records that I had with her, where she had to sign the records as a digital document during the COVID outbreak, I noticed very quickly that the way that it was signed at the clinic itself on these office notes was in print, but when she actually goes and signs something, the handwriting is a lot prettier and it's in cursive. So that tells me that something was up, and so I kind of chased it, and it was a shit show. The entire clinic at that point had experienced a hell of a turnover. Like, when I had shown up to a couple weeks back to go and get like my actual paper records, pretty much the entire staff had a turnover. The clinic manager was outed for their lying habit and everything else, and it just wasn't really that great. This had bred a lot of anxiety on me, and I found myself, because the entire time they had badmouthed my therapist and stuff, and just kind of went out of their ways to be fucks about it, more or less. I had gone up and I had stepped up to bat for her, and this would actually inadvertently start a movement, which I quite frankly wasn't really ready for. So at the time there was a lot of complaints for La Frontera because they're the company that actually bought them out, and so as a consequence of this they became very profit driven. And so the quality of life for a lot of the staff had gone straight to hell. The patients were being treated like shit, and then eventually we had said enough's enough, and we had just kind of started stepping up to the plate. They would have public meetings, and I would attend, and I would sit there and say, hey, what's going on is not okay. The way that my therapist has been treated is not okay. I would put my best foot forward, essentially, and I would be like, hey, she's trying to go and take care of her family and stuff. I've never lodged a complaint against her a day in my fucking life. This is not okay. These are fucking lies. And so I would go and I would chase it meeting to meeting, and eventually when I showed people that it was not okay that this was happening, a lot of people would share their experiences with their therapists at CBIS as well, and they were almost spot on in terms of similarity to what I had going on, except they were from different clinics over in Benson and Douglas and stuff, so it was very different areas but very similar results per se. And so eventually this kind of led to more turnovers. Various corporate staff members were just kind of outed at that point, and then there was kind of like a little bit of a mass revolt going on. And it was great. It was how it should be, because like you want better conditions for the people that are working there, and then when you give those people better conditions, it drips down to all the patients and stuff. It just creates a much healthier environment, I think. And so, we had more or less wrapped this up. My complaint is still ongoing, strangely enough, but in terms of like staff turnover and people being exposed and stuff, that's pretty much already said and done. They had a complete fucking turnover of damn near everybody. So I eventually, as I was saying earlier, I'd gotten to the point where I had to ask my therapist these questions. I sat down and I was like, hon, they're saying that you were doing X, Y, and Z, and that you were trying to pass me off as a patient. Is there any truth to this? If there is, that's fine. I don't care. I just want the truth, like I'm very fucking stubborn in that regard. because I will hunt that shit through the floor. I am not above it. I could tell that my therapist was very uncomfortable with it because it was this very slow, deliberate, deer in the headlights style no. Like I was getting ready, she made it kind of appear like I was getting ready to start mugging her or something, and it was very strange because I actually hold her in very high regard. She doesn't have to worry about these things out of me, just my anxieties and insecurities and all that other random bullshit that people shouldn't have to worry about. So, I feel that me and my therapist actually do very good work together. So I was like, hey, I have this complaint that's open. I would like to do this right instead of doing this fast. May I mention you by name? Can I do X, Y, and Z? And I had gotten her approval ahead of time to go and finish working on the complaint with my insurance company, which again is still ongoing. So by the time I was out of the clinic, by the time I had officially severed ties, I found out that they had tried to get me unshackled from my therapist, lied about my therapist, as well as overdosed me on medication and stuff. And it wasn't really that great. And that's partially the reason why all this shit is still ongoing, because damn near killing somebody apparently is frowned upon. Who knew? So this actually had, I feel to a certain lesser extent, irreparable damage on my therapeutic life. So the next portion of this is going to be focusing on my therapeutic life, as well as, would I recommend therapy to others and things like that. So long story short, I feel that my therapist and I actually mesh very well together. I feel that she has her hands full with me a lot of the time, because I can be kind of hard to deal with. I can be just rough, and having BPD and everything else, I'm sure it doesn't really make her life that much easier. I can even be abrasive at times, but, that's neither here nor there because it's not just her that has to experience that. 9 times out of 10, that drips down to family, friends, relationships of that nature, well, relationships in general. So, um, it's kind of weird. My therapist is very mousy. She can be very, very quiet at times. She can also be borderline crabby at times, which is kind of funny. I can tell when she's not sleeping. Like she's not rude, she's not disrespectful, but she gets a little bit snappier, and, that's okay. So I feel that we have done very good work for a while. I have a lot of anxiety in therapy, I feel, because I have this really bad problem with trying to go and appease others, and so I'm afraid of saying something wrong and pissing off my therapist, and then I'm trying to break. I've been focusing for a year now on breaking down the wall that is me not being able to trust much of anything. I've been trying to actively push to grow in this regard. And so it's really weird because I think having BPD, I frequently look for things that are not there, you know? And so it can be incredibly difficult, but at least now I've been in therapy long enough to where it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm fully aware that I can be black and white sometimes. Like, therapy does have benefits, I feel. It has a fair bit of benefits to it, but it can be incredibly hard to go and find a therapist that meshes well with you. And then sometimes you'll run into therapists that don't like being asked questions at all. It's very important to find somebody that you work well with. It's important to also realize that it is a working relationship. Like, I enjoy her company and stuff. She's not a bad human being, but at the end of the day, we're there to put the work in. And a lot of people, I think, they have this idea that when you're in therapy, it's meant to be like hunky dory and everything's meant to be pleasant all the time. And over my years of doing this, all the way up until now, I have slowly but surely learned that if you're comfortable in therapy, then you're kind of doing something wrong. Like I've always felt that if you're going and you're in therapy, you have to be uncomfortable because that tells you, hey, I'm tackling things that are uncomfortable to me, and that is how you're making progress. At least to me, that's how you make progress. I'm sure that it's going to be different for everybody, but that's how I tend to look at it. And so I always try to tackle things with her, but I find that therapy is split up in a very oddball fashion. What'll happen is I will bitch about my life, and then every now and then I touch down on old trauma. And so, like, when I feel like my feet are not as cold, I touch down on old trauma because I feel like I'm strong enough to handle it. But the problem that I have is whenever I get triggered, I withdraw. So it's like I go, touch down, withdraw, I go, I touch down, I withdraw. And it's kind of like this protracted process, and then having trust issues on top of it really just doesn't help anything. So I find that therapy, while it's an amazing thing for me in general, it's a very difficult process because I have to spend a lot of time literally getting rid of and working down certain mechanisms so I can actually go and progress. So, therapy is a hell of a process. You have to be committed to it. Um, I have, in the time I've been in therapy, I have actually become more comfortable just talking about things like this. This video being a byproduct of, my mental health and personal life. So, this is just kind of how it's rolled downhill for a while now. And so I have finally gotten to the point where I'm comfortable asking her questions. And every now and then I do kind of poke fun at her a little bit, like I do just kind of jab at her a little bit to try to get a rise out of her. I'm trying to be friendlier towards her, and I'm trying to give her my complete trust on top of it. But again, with me, that is a fair bit of a process. So I'm going to go ahead and address the elephant in the room, and that being, is therapy appropriate for everybody? In all honesty, I'm not even sure if I can answer it in a straight fashion. Like, I don't mean that I'm going to lie about it or anything like that. It's just, I feel that in many ways, yes and no. No, I don't think that everybody should be in therapy because therapy is not always a good fit for people. Like a lot of the times with therapy, sometimes people just want to be left the fuck alone. And I get that. And then there's like other times in therapy where, you will need therapy, but the thing is you just won't mesh with the therapist that you have. And so it's hard to answer the question because there's a lot of variables at play. First, you have to go and be like, okay, well, are they meshing well with their therapist? And it's like, well, no, okay, we'll try another therapist. Or it'll be like, should this person be in therapy? Are they an appropriate candidate? And that varies from person to person. I think that, in all honesty, if I had to answer the question honestly, that I think that mental health needs to be tailored from person to person. There is no real blanket solution with things, and therapy as a consequence of that is not what I would call a blanket solution. It's really not. Like, sometimes you're gonna need meds. Sometimes you just need time to yourself. Sometimes you need therapy. Sometimes, you need to swap off therapists. Like, there's just so much stuff to take into consideration that, in all honesty, I don't even really think that I could do the argument any sort of justice. I know that I get benefits from therapy. I use it for maintenance to help mood regulation and things like that. And every now and then I touch down with my therapist and I say, hey, do you still feel that we're a good fit together? How are we doing, more or less? I've officially gotten comfortable to the point where I can sit down and have these conversations without being scared out of my mind. So, there has been some benefit in that regard, and I find that I handle things a little bit better. I'm not as stressed out. But at the same time, while it works for me, I realize it's not going to work for everybody that's under the sun. It's not generally realistic, I feel, in a lot of aspects. So I have more challenges that are coming up in my therapeutic life, like, hey, what happens if I have an alter that pops out during a session since I have D&D? Or what happens if, one of my alters decides to attend one of my sessions without me knowing, and so it's been really just kind of a process, and I have a tendency to kind of bog her down with all of these questions. And I can tell that sometimes she's a little bit overwhelmed, and a lot of people have a tendency to sit there and say, well, if they're overwhelmed, they shouldn't be a therapist. But I think that being overwhelmed in general is a part of being a human being. That's just how that is. It doesn't mean that a person is good or bad. It just means that sometimes the load is very heavy, and I've always felt that I've been a relatively heavy human being. It is a lot for her to go and carry what I'm putting down, and I'm intelligent enough to recognize that. So I don't really view therapy in a traditional sense. I take my therapist into consideration because I realize that there is a lot of emotional baggage that I'm handing them. I know that the old belief system that a lot of people have is that, oh, well, if you're in therapy, they should be able to just deal with it and everything else. I have thought about it for like a very, very long time, and I just felt that it was always a rather defunct way of thinking because, what winds up happening is when you put your trauma down to take a break from it, they have to hold that, and they can also go and get trauma from that as an end result. I've always been a firm believer that therapists do need therapists because it's not very respectable nor reasonable to sit there and expect these human beings that go out of their way to go and try to help people and everything else to carry these huge loads. This is where advanced depression and everything else comes from, so it's something that I've always kind of had in the back of my mind. Now, in many ways, I feel that this kind of holds me back because I have more consideration with what I talk about. Every now and then I have like critical meltdowns and everything else. Those can't really be avoided because it's spontaneous depending on what we're speaking about at the time or what's going on in life. But for most other things, I have a tendency to go and look at it and kind of say to myself, okay, can I soften the blow? A fair bit. And I feel that it's all very important things to go and ask yourself, more or less. I know that the common consensus is, well, if they didn't want to be traumatized, they wouldn't be therapists. I kind of view that as a bullshit way of thinking. That's just how that is and stuff, Just because they go and they elect to do a certain job, it does not mean that they deserve to be traumatized endlessly, like they still have to care for themselves and they still deserve consideration. That's just how that is. Just because they're a therapist, it doesn't mean that they stop being a human being. And it's important to recognize the fact that, yes, while they're in this profession, that they were human beings beforehand and, should be treated as such, much like anybody else that does any kind of service work. So that's kind of how I've gone and viewed things for a while. That's what my journey looked like and everything else. I have other journeys that I've taken mental health wise, but I found that a lot of them were incredibly traumatic and not generally something that I wanted to go and tackle. So it's really, it's just kind of how it is and stuff. So I do have more questions in the pipeline. I was kind of going through the comments, for all the videos, and I'm still going and answering them. I'm just kind of taking my sweet ass time with it, but I knew that the topic of my mental health journey would crop up at some point, so I felt that it is finally appropriate for me to answer it and stuff. I'm sure that there's a bunch of shit in this video that I'm more than sure that I'm missing, but this is what I can remember and such, and so we're going to be going and sticking with it. If you feel that, mental health is right for you, in terms of chasing it and stuff, I say fuck it, do it. You only miss 100% of the shots you never take. But if you feel that, it's not for you and stuff, that's perfectly valid and okay too. Everybody heals in their own way. So with that thought in mind, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this episode up. As always, thank you for your time and your effort, and of course, be good to yourselves and each other. Hey guys, what's going on tonight? I'm back with another round of Raimes mailbag. And this question comes from my Discord server because I post in there relatively heavily because I have an unhealthy addiction. And the question is in direct response to me going and dealing with some pretty fucking awful people. Sometimes I would post about it. And that question is, how do you stay so chill towards people when they behave in fucked up manners like that? I do not. So I have anxiety, right? On the outside, I freeze up and I try to diffuse the situation because people pleasing. But on the inside, I have a tendency to roast pretty hot with it. And I have to work very heavily to try to go and diffuse that internally, because if I don't, my anger is it's pretty far out there. The truth of the matter is, I'm not always able to stay kind. I like the concept of it, like I love sitting there and saying, I'm kind 24/7, but the truth of the matter is that I'm not. I'm pretty pissed with most situations. I am just incredibly quiet about it. So I find most days that I prefer to be kind towards people no matter what kind of bullshit day they're having, because I feel in my heart of hearts that that is how that should be, more or less. That's literally how the hell that should be, because, it's just good to be good to one another, more or less, and I just kind of appreciate that, I think. I try to take the other person into consideration a fair bit. Like, I've had instances where I have been going and getting, public services and stuff, and I'm like, hey, hi, how you doing today? And they'll go and they'll snap at me. And I find that if you apply additional kindness, a lot of the time, it has a tendency to soften them up, more or less. If you go and you show that, hey, I recognize the fact that you're a human being. I don't want to be an asshole towards you. And you lead with that, a lot of the time it disarms them entirely, which is really, really nice. When I have a tendency to go and do these things, I do it because I feel that that is what a lot of people deserve, a lot of the time. I have a tendency to ask myself a ton of questions while I do so. I'll sit there and be like, hey, are they just having a bad day? They're looking kind of grumpy, whatever the case may be, And so I have to pay attention to how they speak quite often, because I can't really see anybody well, anymore at all. And so I have to pay attention to how a lot of language is used. And so I get some people that are assholes just for the sake of being assholes, and I'll try to work through it. I have other people that literally will behave like shit because they're going through it. Maybe they're just having a bad day at home, or maybe they're having a bad day at work. You never really know. I think the weird thing when it comes to interacting with people is that well, it's not so much weird. I think it's more along the lines of an important thing to remember, is that it's very, very important to recognize the fact that we are just human. That you have no real concept of what that other person is going through at all. They could have had a relative that passed away. They could have some shit going on at home. Maybe they woke up and their dick was hanging out on the left side more than the right. You honestly don't know, and you're not capable of knowing because you're not in their life. So I have to remember this a lot of the time when I go and I deal with people, because I've had some people just become such big assholes about truly stupid shit that I literally have to go and apply this thinking to them, because if I don't, I will start screaming at them. I don't really have a very high tolerance for disrespect. I don't think anybody should have a high tolerance for disrespect, that's how it keeps going, more or less. And so I have a tendency to look at people a lot of the time. Sometimes I'll ask them if they're doing all right. I'll just go ahead and pop the question. There was one lady that right after I had my elbow worked on, she was being a real huge cut towards me. And I was trying to schedule the appointment and apparently I wasn't scheduling it fast enough because I can only do so much with a magnifying glass. And so she had gotten kind of pissed about it, and she was like, well, what are you doing over there? And I said, well, hon, I'm trying to go and, get this scheduled. I'm thumbing around for a magnifying glass so I can go and look at my planner. And I had asked her if she was doing okay. And she had growled back, and she's like, I'm doing fine. How are you doing? I said, I'm doing all right. I'm glad to hear that you're doing well. It's how it should be. So she didn't really care for that too much. She had gotten pretty upset with it. And I think it's just kind of gross how people treat each other sometimes, I feel as a species that we kind of forget sometimes that there is another human being on the end of whatever transaction you're attempting to have, with them. And it gets kind of ugly sometimes. And so I find that I'm not always able to be kind with people. I wish I could just be kind 24/7. But the fact of the matter is that kindness does eventually run out. It's not this infinite well that just constantly boils out of you and bubbles up and stuff. It eventually is exhausted, more or less. It does happen. It's not generally a shortcoming of the person who is experiencing the drought. It generally tells me that they've been doing it way too long and they've been sponging up way too much. And so I see this all across the board, in terms of people having bad days and stuff, I see it with delivery people, I see it with, I see it so much in the fast food industry. Oh, Jesus Christ. So I see it a lot, and I find that the best way to deal with it a lot of the time is to just remind people that they're human. You know what I mean? To literally just sit down and be like, hey, this is not particularly, great. Are you doing okay? Sometimes I'll even go as far, if I realize that somebody's in a substantial amount of pain, sometimes I'll even go as far as to ask them, hey, is there anything I can do for you? I feel that when you take people into consideration, things just get better. It's a habit that I have observed as time has gone on, more or less. But no, I have my breaking point. I had literally, oh man, it was probably 3 weeks ago. I was literally having a rough one. I had lost a friend to suicide, and over the course of the day, I was expected to go, write a eulogy, attend the funeral, turn around, and then go to a doctor's appointment, deal with their bullshit, and then fucking take my fat ass home. So I was like, okay. I was like, alright, this is gonna hurt for a bit, but it's gonna be alright. We're gonna go ahead and get through it and stuff. And I had done the eulogy, we had wrapped up everything, went home, got everything set up, and we had more or less gotten out the door with it. I went and I attended my appointment. And this woman behind the counter, I was going and checking in. I was relatively quiet that day, aside from me going and speaking at the funeral and stuff, and I just wasn't really feeling it, I was just kind of sitting around, and, my kindness had been exhausted to a rather large extreme, and so I felt like I was kind of walking around in a stagger state. And so I had walked in, I went to check in, and they were like, hello, what can I do for you? And I said, hey hon, how you doing? I'm checking in for Dr. Nolan today. I'm gonna go and have a seat somewhere. And I went to go have a seat, and this woman is like, don't address me like that, that's sexist. And I had gotten so pissed with it. And I wasn't even so much pissed off at the fact that she called me sexist. I already know that that shit's a lie. I was more pissed off at the fact that she was being a triggered cunt for the sake of being a triggered cunt, so I decided to make a public example out of her. In the waiting room, there was 60-something people. the waiting room for this particular clinic is fucking huge because they do MRIs, CT scans, just all kinds of shit. It's like a giant mega clinic, more or less. Has multiple doctors going through it, like all kinds of great stuff. And I had flat out told her, I was like, I find it incredibly fucking awful that medical workers bitch about how awful their fucking working conditions are. But you go in, you try to treat them with, like, a shred of decency. And instead of being like, hey, thank you, you decide that the hill you want to die on is treating me like fucking garbage. And I went ahead and I had unloaded on her. The kindness was officially dead at this point. And so I had gotten pissed with her, and I said, alright, you brainless bitch, this is what you're going to be dealing with today. This is what I have going on. I have to go and I have to attend this appointment, but before I got here, I had to write a eulogy. I had to go and present it at a funeral, bury somebody, pull myself together, and compose myself well enough to go and have this appointment. And your biggest complaint that you're literally going to try to dump on me is me trying to show you a bit of my kindness that I carry. I said, I wish the biggest problem that I had at this point was how people address me. And so the whole room just kind of froze up, because with me having hearing issues, it is, I have a tendency to talk loud, is really what it boils down to and stuff. My ears ring and stuff, and then they're kind of lo-fi on top of it to a certain lesser extent. And when I went ahead and just kind of busted her teeth out, the entire room just kind of gets a hushed tone. She looks at me, she's all embarrassed. And I just remember kind of sitting there thinking in the back of my mind, it's like, Jesus fucking Christ, I'm sitting there having to carry all this. And, she's gonna whine, bitch, and moan me to death when I'm trying to give her a bit of my kindness that I currently don't have at the moment, Like, I'm literally trying to go and be the best that I can be on an empty tank of gas, more or less. And it was just really fucking shitty. And so I wasn't really done yet, Like, I went to go sit down, and she had gotten quiet, and she goes, I'm sorry. And I said, I think it's easier to apologize than it is to be a decent human being in general. And she had just shut the fuck up, sat there, didn't say jack shit. Her co-workers are fucking snickering, all that shit. And I think it's shitty. Like, it's really shitty when you have to go and carry that. You're already doing your best, right? Like, you're already going out and you're like, hey, I know that I'm kind of suffering and struggling a fair bit, but I'm still going to show this woman kindness that I honestly don't have, because I feel that that's what she deserves, more or less. And instead, she's going to try to rip into me, and then, of course, when you go and you start ripping into them right back and stuff, all of a sudden the entire mood changes, more or less. But I don't have a tendency... When it comes to my public life, I don't really have a tendency to rip into people too often. I just don't. I like to be really, really chill about a lot of things, but in the off chance that I have somebody that tries to take a stab at me publicly and they catch me on, like, a really hellish day, I have a tendency to verbally eviscerate them, much to their detriment, and then this often leads to accidental public humiliation, because normally I try to handle things privately a lot of the time, but when you go and you rip into somebody publicly, whether it's intentional or not, it has a tendency to publicly humiliate them, because a lot of the time their peers will go and laugh at them. And so it was just really, really shitty. My doctor went ahead and saw me. He had asked what happened. And I had explained things. I said, yeah, I'm just kind of going through it. I said I was trying to treat her decently, and she decided that she was going to take a jab at me. So I kind of gave her the third degree. I was like, hey, if you want to go and cancel me as a patient, that's fine. I get it. I'm willing to own that, but I'm not going to say sorry for it. And he was like, well, I didn't know that she behaved like that. we've already told her that most people that speak like that are harmless, and, she just kind of continues with it. And I said, I'm not sure she's having a bad day or what, man. It's perfectly fine, but, if you want to can me, that's fine. He goes, oh, hell no, I love having you as a patient. And so we sat down and we talked about it a fair bit and stuff, and it was just really kind of a hell of an experience, but no, I try to handle everything with a fair bit of kindness, but I'm only human. I can only go so far with it, I think, and on the off chance that, I am having just a day that is so fucking bad that I can't function, like, at all, and then I am, like, forced into, like, ripping into you, 9 times out of 10, that's just how that's going to be, But no, it was completely and utterly awful. I went ahead and I had wrapped my appointment. I was on my way out the door. The other 2 receptionists had apologized to me. They're like, hey, we're sorry. And I was really chill about it, I think. I said, hey, don't apologize for things that you didn't do. You're busy being responsible for yourselves. You don't really have time to be responsible for somebody else. I'm like, they're not a child, they're an adult. They're more than capable of being responsible for themselves. And I had left the clinic, So, but when it all boils down to it, I kind of wish that I had the capacity to just kind of have a never-ending well, more or less, of kindness that I could always tap into wherever, whenever, all that jazz, really. But the truth of the matter is that I don't. I wish I did, but I don't, and it's really awful because I would strongly prefer to just be like that all the time. Like, every time I go and rip into somebody, it takes a little bit of a chunk out of me, and I can't stand that shit. I really can't. You kind of feel like you're dying inside a little bit, when it happens, and it's not really that great, So, but I handle everything as I handle it. Most of the time I'm able to handle it with a certain amount of grace and tact. Every blue moon, I'm not able to. It really just squarely depends on how much hell I'm absorbing at that point. A lot of people they ask me, they're like, how do you do it? There really is no method. Like, I don't have, like, a method down pat, per se. It's just, I just go and handle it how I handle it, and I just try to do my best with it, and I think that that's about as far as I would, be able to take it, more or less. So the important thing to remember is that people are just people. Everybody's struggling with something. It doesn't matter if you can see that struggle or not. You're most often not going to be able to see it publicly. It's important to treat each other well. It's important to do the best that you can do. And if you have lapses, then you have lapses. That's okay. That's literally how that is. Now, for the other people, it is okay for, them to go and have bad days as well. Not every day is going to be a banger. That's perfectly acceptable. However, when you go out of your way to be an asshole to somebody, then, it's only reasonable to expect an appropriate response, more or less. So that is pretty much going to wrap it for this particular topic. Still debating on whether or not I want to shove a bunch of these smaller ones into like a large video and stuff. I've been playing around for it for a little bit now. Went over the older recordings and stuff, and realized that my speech is all garbled. I can't really talk straight. And so it appears that is from me being exhausted from the anti-seizure meds that they have me on. So I apologize about all those recordings. I was gonna go back and redo it, but I was like, fuck it, leave it raw. And, it's just how that's going to be, more or less. So for all those that went ahead and came out and stuff, gave me your time and your energy, your comments, all that great stuff, I greatly appreciate you. And as always, till next time, be good to yourselves and each other.